My name is Rachel. 5 years ago, my wealthy family threw me out and erased my existence simply because the man I married did not fit their country club aesthetic. Not a single phone call, not a holiday invitation, nothing for 5 long years. But the day my husband took his artificial intelligence company public with a $100 million valuation, my mother miraculously found her way past the security of our Seattle penthouse. She did not come to apologize. Instead, she stepped onto my Italian marble floors without taking off her shoes and handed me a printed invoice for $5 million. She told me it was the price to rehabilitate my image and buy my way back into the family. I just smiled and took the paper. She thought she was extorting me, but she had no idea she had just handed me the exact blueprint to financially obliterate them all. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who only value you when it benefits their bank account. I am 33 years old and a senior partner in commercial real estate development. For the last 48 hours, my phone had not stopped ringing. Jamal, my brilliant 35-year-old husband, had just launched the initial public offering for his health technology firm. He built this company from the ground up in our cramped first apartment, creating an algorithm that detects early-stage pancreatic cancer. The financial news outlets were practically screaming his name. The stock soared on its first day of trading, pushing his net worth right to the $100 million mark. Suddenly, I was no longer the disgraced and disowned daughter. I was a high-value target. We now live in an $8 million penthouse overlooking the Puget Sound. The water outside was churning gray under an autumn storm, a perfect reflection of the chaos about to enter my home. Jamal was in his home office finishing a critical call with his board of directors. I was standing in the foyer when the heavy oak door chimed. I assumed it was a courier delivering celebration champagne from a grateful client. When I pulled the door open, my breath hitched in my throat. Catherine stood on my threshold, my mother. She wore her signature designer trench coat, her blonde hair sprayed into a stiff helmet that defied gravity. She did not look apologetic or hesitant. She looked around my foyer with the entitled appraisal of a real estate inspector calculating how much load-bearing wall she could demolish. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her heels clicked sharply against the imported stone. She did not bother to take off her shoes, tracking damp city streets onto my immaculate floors. "Nice place," she said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "A bit modern for my taste. Very stark. But I suppose it works for the new money crowd." "How did you get past the lobby security?" Catherine I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. I refused to call her mom. She lost that privilege half a decade ago when she told me I was ruining the family bloodline by marrying a black man. "I told the guards I was the mother of the bride," she replied smoothly. "People tend to open doors when you speak with authority, Rachel. You would know that if you had not spent the last 5 years hiding from your heritage." She turned to face me fully, her cold eyes sweeping over my tailored slacks and silk blouse, assessing my financial worth in real time. "You look tired," she noted casually. "Money stresses people out when they do not know how to handle it properly." Growing up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, Catherine and my father Richard cared more about their standing among the suburban elite than the actual well-being of their children. My younger sister Ashley played their game perfectly. She married Trent, a loud and arrogant retail broker who mirrored my father perfectly. I chose a different path. When Jamal and I got engaged, my father refused to pay for the wedding and formally disowned me. They cut me off entirely. They even told their society friends I was away at a wellness retreat to hide the truth of their blatant racism. Jamal and I survived without them. I worked 80-hour weeks managing commercial real estate deals to pay our rent and fund his initial server costs. We built our empire brick by brick with our own hands. Now here she was. Catherine reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a crisp, cream-colored envelope. She held it out to me like it was a royal decree. "What is this?" I asked, refusing to reach for it. A path back to the family, Catherine said, forcing the envelope onto the console table next to a vase of white orchids. Your father and I are willing to let bygones be bygones. We understand that young women make rebellious choices to spite their parents. But now that there is substantial capital involved, it is time to bring that wealth back to where it belongs under proper management. I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words. 5 years of absolute silence. 5 years of ignoring my birthdays, my anniversaries, my entire existence. And she was standing in my home, offering me forgiveness for a massive price tag. I slid my finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a printed spreadsheet. It was not a heartfelt letter of apology. It was an itemized invoice. I read the lines aloud, my voice remarkably steady. Country Club Foundation donation $1 million. Ashley and Trent suburban mortgage payoff $1.5 million. Richard Hedge Fund liquidity injection $2.5 million. I looked up from the paper locking eyes with the woman who gave birth to me. You came to my home after 5 years of treating me like a disease to hand me a $5 million ransom note. Your husband company just hit a $100 million valuation. Catherine sighed, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet as if she were completely bored by my reaction. $5 million is a fair price to rehabilitate your image and bring you back into the family. Ashley, husband Trent, is struggling with his brokerage firm. Your sister needs stability, and your father fund just needs a little capital to clear a temporary hurdle. $5 million is a drop in the bucket for you now. It is the absolute bare minimum you owe us for the embarrassment you caused this family when you eloped with him. The underlying racism was palpable. Catherine viewed Jamal's immense success as an unearned fluke, a sudden windfall that she was entitled to claim in order to save her crumbling white-collar facade. She expected me to just hand over his hard-earned money to bail out the very people who had mocked him. Before I could tear the paper in half and throw it in her face, a deep, steady voice echoed from the hallway. I believe him has a name, Catherine, and it is on the deed to this penthouse. Jamal stepped into the foyer holding his morning coffee. He did not look intimidated at all. He looked at Catherine like she was a trespasser about to be evicted. Jamal stood tall beside me in his simple black turtleneck and tailored trousers. He radiated a kind of quiet, impenetrable authority that instantly made my mother and her superficial country club arrogance look painfully cheap. Catherine stiffened instinctively, her lips pursed together as if she had just tasted spoiled milk. She looked at Jamal not as a son-in-law, not even as a successful human being, but as a minor inconvenience standing between her and a massive bank vault. Jamal, she said, the syllables clipped and dripping with pure disdain. I see your little computer project finally paid off. I suppose congratulations are in order. Your father always said the tech bubble was full of affirmative action handouts, but clearly someone was willing to buy what you were selling. I felt a sudden surge of cold, lethal fury spike in my chest. The racist undertone was not even hidden. She was wearing it like a badge of honor, casually insulting the brilliant man who had worked tirelessly to build an empire that saves lives. I took a step forward, fully prepared to have the building security team drag her out by her designer lapels. But Jamal gently caught my wrist. His touch was warm and grounding. It was a silent reminder that we did not lose our tempers. We dismantled our enemies with pure, unadulterated logic. It was not a handout, Catherine. Jamal said, his voice terrifyingly calm and steady. It is a predictive artificial intelligence algorithm that detects early-stage pancreatic cancer. It gives doctors a fighting chance to save lives. But I would not expect someone whose greatest life achievement is marrying a hedge fund manager to understand the mechanics of actual value-creating work. Catherine's eyes flashed with immediate venom. Excuse me, you are speaking to my daughter, mother. I am speaking to a trespasser, Jamal corrected effortlessly. He took a casual sip of his hot coffee. But since you are here, let us talk about this ridiculous list. $2.5 million for Richard Hedge Fund. I read the Financial Times, Catherine. Richard is not facing a simple hurdle. His fund has been bleeding institutional investors for 6 consecutive quarters. He is completely underwater. That is absolutely none of your business, Catherine snapped. She turned back to me desperately, trying to reestablish her lost control. Rachel, you are a blood member of this family. Are you going to let him speak to me this way? Are you going to deny your own sister Ashley the security she deserves just because you are bitter? Ashley is 30 years old, I said. My voice dropped to a whisper that commanded total silence in the large room. Her husband Trent drives a leased luxury sports car while defaulting on their suburban mortgage. That is not my problem. That is a symptom of the severe financial illiteracy you raised her with. They are your family. Catherine's voice rose, echoing sharply against the high ceilings. You owe us. We raised you. We put you through college. We gave you the elite pedigree that allowed you to even step foot in the commercial real estate world. You think you built your little career on your own. You used our prestigious name. I paid off my student loans myself by working endless overtime hours, I replied smoothly. And I dropped your last name the day I married Jamal. I use his name now. And ironically, it is a name that is currently ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange. Catherine's jaw tightened visibly. She realized intimidation was not working, so she switched tactics. Her eyes narrowed as she adopted a disturbing tone of fake maternal concern. Listen to me, Rachel. You think this new money protects you. You think a sudden windfall means you do not need your people. When the media starts digging into your husband's background, and they absolutely will, they are going to look for a pristine family narrative. If Trent Brokerage goes under, or if your father fund collapses, the press will frame it as you turning your back on your own flesh and blood after a massive payout. She took a step closer to me, lowering her voice into a vicious hiss. It will tank his stock instantly. The corporate board will not like the public relations nightmare. If I do not leave here with an agreement today, tomorrow morning, articles will feature an exclusive interview with me. I will be crying about how Jamal emotionally abuses you. I will tell them he isolated you from your loving family to control your inherited assets and force you into a toxic marriage. It was a severe threat, a sloppy, desperate threat, but a threat nonetheless. She was explicitly implying that if I did not pay up, she would run straight to the tabloids. She would smear Jamal's initial public offering by painting him as a manipulative opportunist. She wanted to frame me as a brainwashed victim and destroy the reputation my husband had spent half a decade building. Jamal looked at me, and I looked at Jamal. We did not need to speak aloud. 5 years of building an impressive empire together meant we communicated in quick micro-expressions. We did not get angry at empty threats. We systematically dismantled the people making them. I will keep the list. I said, my voice completely devoid of the anger Catherine was desperately trying to provoke. Catherine smirked, a flash of pure triumph lighting up her eyes. She thought I had folded. She genuinely believed the threat of bad press had forced my hand. I knew you would see reason, she said, smoothing down her coat with a satisfied sigh. I will expect a wire transfer by the end of the week. Trent has a massive margin call he needs to cover by Friday. Do not be late, Rachel. We will invite you to the country club gala on the 15th once the funds clear. You can finally introduce your husband to polite society. I will review Trent and Richard's financial documents first, I said smoothly. I stepped forward to open the front door for her. I do not write blank checks. Have Trent send his broker-dealer compliance reports to my office. If he wants my money, I want to see his books line by line. Fine, Catherine scoffed. She stepped out into the hallway, completely oblivious to the trap I had just laid. You always had to make things difficult. Just have the money ready. She walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking victoriously against the polished floor. I closed the door, letting the heavy thud of the oak shut out her toxicity. It felt like a profound physical relief. I looked down at the cream-colored paper in my hands. The $5 million demand. She thought she just extorted us. But she had no idea she just handed me the exact blueprint to her family total financial ruin. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing Catherine out of our sanctuary. I stood in the foyer, the cream-colored invoice feeling like a toxic artifact burning in my hands. The silence of the penthouse stretched for a few seconds before the door to Jamal's home office swung open. Nia stepped out into the hallway. Nia was 38, Jamal's older sister, and a senior partner at one of New York's most ruthless corporate law firms. She had flown in to celebrate the initial public offering wearing a tailored charcoal suit that commanded absolute respect even in a casual setting. Nia possessed a lethal intellect. She did not just read the law, she weaponized it to completely dismantle her opponents in the boardroom. "I heard shouting," Nia said casually, adjusting her designer glasses as she walked into the foyer. "Was that the infamous Catherine?" "In the flesh," Jamal said, handing Nia the piece of paper. "She wants $5 million to rehabilitate Rachel's image and bring her back into the fold. 2.5 million for her father failing hedge fund and 1.5 million to cover Trent's suburban mortgage." Nia took the paper, her sharp eyes darting across the numbers. A low, melodic chuckle escaped her lips. She came to the home of a billionaire chief executive officer and a commercial real estate mogul, and she handed them an itemized list of her family's most severe financial liabilities. Do these country club elitists lack a basic survival instinct, or is it just her? "It is pure arrogance," I said, walking toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. "She thinks because I was quiet for 5 years, I was cowering in a corner. She does not realize I have spent the last 5 years reading Securities and Exchange Commission filings and auditing massive commercial portfolios. She threatened to go to the press and smear Jamal's initial public offering if we do not pay up." Nia leaned against the marble island, tapping her manicured nails against the countertop. $1.5 million is an incredibly specific number for a residential mortgage payoff, Nia observed, pushing her designer glasses up the bridge of her nose. "That is not just missed payments. That is a balloon payment coming due, or a second mortgage he took out to cover severe liquidity issues in his firm. Trent is drowning. A smear campaign is a legitimate nuisance. Health technology stock is highly volatile in its first week of trading. Institutional investors get easily spooked by messy family lawsuits or public relations scandals. We cannot have Trent or Richard crying to the Wall Street Journal that Jamal is hoarding wealth while his in-laws are being foreclosed on." I told her I needed to see Trent and Richard books before I wire any money, I said, taking a sip of water. "Catherine is greedy. She will force Trent to send over his brokerage compliance reports. She thinks I am just being a stickler for paperwork." "And what are we actually going to do with those books?" Jamal asked, leaning against the doorway. There was a predatory glimmer in his eye. He knew exactly what I was capable of when I was cornered. "We are going to find out exactly why Richard is bleeding institutional investors and why Trent has a margin call he cannot cover," I said, my voice dropping to a clinical chill. "Trent is a retail broker. If he is defaulting on a $1.5 million mortgage and he is facing a massive margin call, he is severely over-leveraged. Finance guys like Trent do not just lose their own money. When they panic, they dip into client funds to cover their tracks." Nia's eyes lit up with predatory realization. "Embezzlement." "Exactly," I said. "If I can prove Trent is commingling client funds to cover his bad trades, and Richard Hedge Fund is illegally covering for him, we do not just refuse to pay them. We report them to the Securities and Exchange Commission. But we do not do it blindly. We need absolute leverage. I will draft a non-disclosure and financial review agreement right now," Nia said instantly, already walking back toward the office to grab her laptop. "I will frame it as standard due diligence for a private equity injection. I am adding an irrevocable waiver of liability and a full audit consent clause. It will be buried on page 12 under standard indemnification jargon. Trent is too arrogant to hire outside counsel for what he assumes is a simple family handout. He will sign it himself to save money and keep his partners in the dark. Once he signs that document and hands over his internal ledgers, he legally waives his right to privacy regarding those specific accounts. We will have lawful access to his financial rot." "Do it," Jamal said. He walked over to me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Are you absolutely sure you want to pull the trigger on this, Rachel? Once Nia gets those books, we are not just cutting them off. We are completely dismantling them. Your father could face federal charges if he is covering for Trent." I turned around in his arms, looking up into the eyes of the man who had stood by me when my own family called me a disgrace. I remembered the night we got engaged. I had called my father crying with joy, only for Richard to hang up the phone without a single word. I remembered our wedding day, a small ceremony in a courthouse where the only family sitting on the bride's side was a painfully empty row of chairs. They did not care if I was destroyed, I said softly, but with unwavering firmness. Catherine just tried to extort you on the biggest week of your life using my sister debt as a weapon. They think they can abuse us, discard us because of your skin color, and then treat us like an automated teller machine when they go bankrupt. I looked over at Nia, who was rapidly typing on her laptop keyboard, her eyes focused and intense. Draft the agreement, Nia. Make it airtight. Let Trent think he is getting a massive bailout. We are going to buy their debt audit, their lies, and when they show up to their precious country club gala next week, expecting a multi-million-dollar check, we hand them a subpoena. Nia finished typing with a sharp strike of the enter key, a lethal smile spreading across her face. Jamal pulled out his phone and quickly texted his board of directors advising them to hold steady and ignore any upcoming media noise. Nia hit send on the email containing the agreement. The trap was officially armed. My family thought they were playing a game of emotional blackmail. They did not realize they had just stepped onto a chessboard where I owned all the pieces. 2 days later, the coordinated smear campaign began exactly as Catherine had threatened. I was sitting in my corner office at the commercial real estate firm reviewing a complex zoning permit for a new high-rise development. The morning had been quiet, but the calm shattered when my assistant knocked rapidly on the glass door. She looked pale and held a tablet tightly to her chest. She apologized for interrupting, but insisted I needed to see what was trending across financial social media platforms right that second. She handed me the tablet with trembling hands. It was an article from a mid-tier sensationalist financial blog. This was the kind of publication that specialized in corporate hit pieces, short-seller propaganda, and unsubstantiated gossip rather than actual financial journalism. The headline screamed in bold black letters across the top of the screen, "The dark money behind health tech. Billion-dollar IPO. Did family coercion fund the next AI giant?" I read through the article, my expression freezing into a mask of pure ice. The piece cleverly avoided using Jamal's name directly in the absolute worst allegations to sidestep an immediate defamation lawsuit. However, the implications were heavily and unmistakably laid out for any institutional investor to read. An anonymous source claiming to be extremely close to the family alleged that the early seed money for the company was acquired through aggressive familial pressure. The source claimed that the ambitious founder had isolated his wife from her prominent Connecticut family to maintain absolute control over her inherited assets and commercial real estate earnings. The article painted my husband as a manipulative opportunist who had alienated a wealthy heiress from her loving, supportive family. It stated he was now refusing to help her aging parents out of sheer vindictiveness and greed. "Anonymous source," I muttered, tossing the tablet onto my polished wooden desk. It was obviously Ashley. My younger sister had always been a master of playing the victim. She had connections to minor public relations firms through Trent and his various networking events. This was unmistakably her handiwork. The sloppy grammar, the melodramatic tone, and the extreme overuse of country club buzzwords made it incredibly obvious. Words like pedigree, generational stewardship, and legacy capital were sprinkled throughout the text. These were the exact phrases my mother and sister used when they wanted to sound important while holding a cocktail glass at a charity function. It was exactly the kind of emotional manipulation Catherine had planned, executed with Ashley's signature lack of subtlety. They had hired a cheap crisis management firm to plant the story, hoping the sudden negative press would force us into immediate compliance. They wanted to twist the narrative of our struggle in that tiny first apartment into a story of me being held hostage. My phone vibrated violently on the desk. It was Jamal. "Have you seen it?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tight control he was exercising over his frustration. "I am looking at it right now," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "How is the stock reacting today?" "Down 2% in pre-market trading." Jamal replied, his words clipped. Institutional investors hate unpredictable domestic drama. It makes corporate leadership look unstable during a critical growth phase. A 2% dip on a valuation this size is millions of dollars wiped out in minutes just because of gossip. My board of directors is already asking questions. They want to know why my in-laws are running to the tabloids calling me a financial predator. They are trying to panic us, I said, staring hard at the sensational headline glowing on the tablet screen. Catherine thinks if she puts enough public pressure on your stock price, I will wire the $5 million today, just to shut them up and make the bad press disappear. She thinks we are terrified of losing the momentum of the IPO. What is the play? Jamal asked, his trust in my strategic mind absolute. He knew I operated best under intense pressure. We stick to the exact plan we made with Nia, I told him. Has she sent the due diligence agreement to Trent yet? Sent it an hour ago, Jamal confirmed. Trent office officially received it. Good, I said, standing up and grabbing my tailored blazer from the back of my chair. Should we release a defensive public relations statement? Jamal asked. My communications team has a draft ready to counter the allegations and calm the board down. We can highlight that the seed money came from your own commercial real estate deals, not an inheritance. Absolutely not, I told him firmly. Do not release a single word defending yourself or the company. If you issue a denial, you validate the article and give it more oxygen. You make it a legitimate two-sided debate instead of a trashy rumor. Let them think the pressure is working. Let Catherine and Ashley think we are panicking and scrambling for a response behind closed doors. Silence will make them overconfident, and overconfidence leads to massive mistakes. I slipped my arms into my blazer and straightened my collar, preparing for battle. Where are you going? Jamal asked. I am going to pay my dear sister a visit, I replied. I walked out of my office, my mind calculating every possible angle of the confrontation ahead. They wanted to play dirty in the public eye, leveraging my husband's hard-earned reputation to extort us for millions. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I was not the quiet, rejected daughter they threw away 5 years ago. I was a commercial developer who tore down decaying structures for a living, and their perfect, privileged suburban facade was about to be my next demolition project. I headed straight down to the executive parking garage and got into my car. I pulled out into the Seattle traffic, driving straight into the lion den to confront the parasites face to face. I was 3 blocks away from Trent Boutique brokerage firm when my phone rang through the car Bluetooth system. It was my executive assistant. She sounded uncharacteristically frantic, explaining that my sister Ashley and her husband Trent had just bypassed our building lobby security by tailgating a delivery worker. They were currently pacing outside my office doors, loudly demanding to see me immediately. I smiled smoothly, executing a sharp U-turn at the next intersection. They were saving me the trip. I drove back into my executive parking garage, the anticipation sharpening my focus and cooling my blood. I took the private elevator up to my floor, ready to trap them on my own territory. I stepped out of the elevator and walked down the pristine, glass-walled corridor of my commercial real estate firm. Trent and Ashley were standing in the reception area, completely disregarding professional decorum. Ashley was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, playing the part of a harassed and victimized socialite. Trent was pacing aggressively, his suit looking expensive, but tailored, poorly, sweating slightly, despite the optimal climate control of the building. When they saw me approaching, Trent puffed out his chest, adopting a wide stance he probably thought looked dominant and intimidating. They swaggered past my assistant without a word of apology and followed me directly into my expansive corner office without waiting for an invitation. I walked behind my massive mahogany desk and turned to face them. I did not offer them a seat. I let the silence stretch for a moment, forcing them to feel the imposing weight of the room. Ashley smirked, finally pulling down her sunglasses to glare at me. I suppose you saw the article this morning, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy and toxic satisfaction. It is a terrible shame how quickly public perception can turn against a newly public company. The market is so sensitive to scandal. Trent slammed his hands flat on the polished surface of my desk, leaning forward in a pathetic attempt to physically intimidate me. "Do not test us, Rachel," he threatened, his voice harsh and loud. "That little blog post was just a warning shot. It was a favor to show you we are serious. Tomorrow morning, a major financial network is running an exclusive piece. It will feature your mother crying on national television about how Jamal emotionally manipulates you and hoards your family wealth. If that $5 million is not wired into our accounts by 5 o'clock today, Jamal's initial public offering goes up in absolute smoke. The board will force him out by the end of the week." I did not flinch. I did not negotiate. I did not even raise my voice. I simply walked out from behind my desk, stepped over to the heavy glass door of my office, and turned the solid steel deadbolt, locking us inside. The loud click echoed sharply in the quiet room. Ashley's smug smile faltered instantly. Trent stood up straight, suddenly looking much less confident in the enclosed soundproof space. I walked back to my desk, picked up the thick manila folder containing the non-disclosure and financial review agreement that Nia had drafted, and dropped it heavily right in front of Trent. "I do not negotiate with financial terrorists," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that cut through the air like a scalpel. "You want my husband money to save your pathetic, collapsing career. You sign the due diligence release right now. You give me full unredacted access to your brokerage internal ledgers for the past 24 months. Trent scoffed, crossing his arms and trying to laugh it off, though a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "I am not letting some diversity hire lawyer look through my proprietary trading books. You are completely out of your mind if you think I am handing over my internal records for a simple family loan. Just wire the money, Rachel. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I leaned over the desk, invading his personal space, my eyes locking onto his terrified, shifting gaze. I let him see exactly how little I cared about his threats. "You will sign it, Trent," I commanded, stripping away any pretense of familial relation. "Because if you do not, I will not just deny you the money. I will pick up this phone and call the Securities and Exchange Commission myself. I will trigger an immediate random compliance audit on your failing brokerage. I know you are facing a massive margin call. I know you lack the liquidity to cover it. I know you have been scrambling for capital for weeks. The moment federal auditors walk through your doors and demand to see your client funds, you go to federal prison." Ashley gasped, taking a stumbling step backward and looking at her husband in absolute horror. She only cared about her shopping budget and her country club status. The word prison shattered her carefully constructed reality. "Trent, what is she talking about?" Ashley demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "Tell her she is lying." Trent did not look at his wife. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking sickly and gray. He looked down at the thick legal contract on the desk, then up at my phone, realizing with sudden crushing clarity that I held his entire life and freedom in my hands. He was out of time, out of money, and completely out of leverage. Cornered, sweating profusely, and terrified of federal prison, his sheer greed and desperation overrode whatever tiny shred of logic he had left. He convinced himself that signing the document was the only way to get the cash infusion he desperately needed to cover his crimes. His hands trembling violently, Trent snatched the heavy gold pen from my desk set and hastily signed his name at the bottom of the due diligence agreement. He flipped to the secondary authorization page and signed that as well. He threw the contract back across the desk at me, panting heavily. "The books will be securely transmitted to your lawyer within the hour," he spat out, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "Now send the wire transfer before the market closes." I picked up the signed contract, checking the signatures to ensure they were valid and legally binding. A cold, victorious satisfaction settled deep in my bones. Trent had no idea what he had just done. By trying to extort me to cover his failures, he had just legally opened his fraudulent financial records to the most ruthless corporate lawyer in New York. He had handed over the keys to his own destruction. He hastily unlocked the office door and dragged a shell-shocked Ashley out into the hallway, fleeing my firm like a beaten dog. I sat down in my leather chair, dialed Nia number, and waited for the trap to officially spring shut. Nia picked up on the first ring. "I have the files, Rachel," she said. her voice crackling with the sharp energy of a predator scenting blood. The secure server just received a massive data dump from Trent Compliance Office. I am unlocking the encrypted ledgers now. Give it a thorough sweep, I told her, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. He signed the waiver. We have full legal authorization to review every single transaction. Find the rot. In her high-rise corner office in Manhattan, Nia went to work. She did not just read financial statements, she dissected them. With her team of forensic accountants placed on standby, she isolated the specific accounts tied to Trent Retail Brokerage. It did not take her days to find the discrepancies. It took her less than an hour. The financial crimes were so glaringly obvious, so poorly hidden behind dummy accounts, that it was almost insulting to her intelligence. An hour and 15 minutes after Trent fled my office, Nia called me back. We merged Jamal onto a secure conference line. It is worse than we thought, Nia announced, the lethal satisfaction evident in her tone. Trent is not just bad at his job. He is actively committing federal felonies. He is commingling retail client funds. When his personal trades tanked and the margin calls hit, he panicked. He started sweeping money out of his clients' retirement portfolios and moving it into his proprietary trading accounts to cover his massive losses. He is literally stealing from middle-class families to keep his leased sports car and his suburban mansion. And Richard, Jamal asked, his voice deadly calm. How is your father tied into this mess, Rachel? Nia typed rapidly on her keyboard, bringing up the secondary ledgers. Richard Hedge Fund is acting as an illegal clearinghouse. Every time Trent gets close to failing a compliance check, Richard Fund wires a temporary liquidity injection to Trent Brokerage. They artificially inflate Trent accounts just long enough to pass the monthly regulatory snapshots. Then Trent wires the money back to Richard. It is a highly coordinated, incredibly illegal shell game. They are running a mini Ponzi scheme to prop up their country club lifestyles. Before I could respond, Nia's phone beeped on another line. Hold on, she said. I have an incoming call from a Seattle area code. It is Trent. He probably got a notification that I opened the data room. Let me conference you two in. Stay completely silent. Let me handle him. Nia clicked a button merging Trent onto the line while quietly activating her recording software. She was legally permitted to record in her jurisdiction, and the due diligence agreement he signed covered all communications regarding the financial review. This is Nia, she answered, her tone shifting instantly to a bored, bureaucratic drone. Listen to me, Trent barked, his voice loud and frantic. I sent over the files. You have the books. I need that wire transfer initiated right now. The market closes in 3 hours and I have obligations to meet. Tell Rachel to release the funds. I am currently reviewing the ledgers you provided, Trent, Nia said, smoothly baiting him with administrative delays. However, I am noticing some highly irregular transfers between your client holding accounts and your proprietary trading desks. I cannot authorize a $5 million equity injection until these discrepancies are legally categorized. There are no discrepancies, Trent shouted, his panic turning into aggressive rage. You do not need to categorize anything. This is a family loan. It is none of your business how I structure my internal accounts. Just approve the transfer. As a fiduciary handling my brother and sister-in-law capital, it is entirely my business, Nia replied, her voice remaining perfectly even. If you cannot explain why retail funds are covering your margin calls, I will have to advise them to halt the transaction. Trent lost whatever tiny fraction of control he had left. His arrogance and deeply rooted racism exploded out of him in a desperate, ugly tirade. You listen to me, you diversity hire lawyer. Trent snarled, the slur dripping with venom. You are just a glorified secretary playing with money that does not belong to you. Rachel and Jamal owe my family this money. If that wire does not hit my account today, my mother-in-law is going straight to the press. We will ruin Jamal Company. We will tell the world he is a controlling, abusive fraud. You approve that transfer right now, or I swear I will destroy your brother's initial public offering. The line went dead silent for 2 seconds. Then Nia let out a low, chilling chuckle. It was a sound that would give nightmares to hardened criminals. Thank you for clarifying your position, Trent. Nia said, her voice dropping the administrative act and becoming razor sharp. I have everything I need. Have a wonderful afternoon. She hung up on him, cutting off his frantic sputtering. Did you get all of that? Nia asked us, clicking save on the encrypted audio file. We heard every word Jamal said. His voice was a dangerous, quiet rumble. He just admitted to extortion on a recorded line, confirming Catherine's threat. And he just admitted that the irregularities in his books are intentional, Nia added. I have flagged the exact routing numbers where the embezzlement occurred. I have the proof of Richard's illegal capital injections. I have the recorded extortion attempt. The moment I submit this dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission, federal agents will freeze their accounts and start handing out indictments. Should I hit send on the whistleblower portal right now? I sat in my office looking out at the Seattle skyline. My family had tried to use my husband race his success and my supposed loyalty against me. They had demanded a ransom to save a criminal enterprise built on stolen money. Hold the SEC filing for 24 hours, I commanded, a brilliant and vicious strategy forming in my mind. Why wait? Jamal asked. Because if the federal government freezes their assets today, they go to jail, but their creditors get the remaining scraps, I explained, pulling up a commercial database on my computer. I want to own the scraps. I want to own the foundation they stand on. Trent and Richard owe millions to private lenders. Those lenders are holding the mortgages on Catherine Mansion and Trent luxury cars. If those lenders catch wind of an SEC investigation, those debt notes become completely worthless, toxic assets. Nia caught on immediately. You want to buy their debt. I'm going to use my commercial capital to execute a hostile takeover of every single loan they have, I said, my voice resolute and unyielding. We are not paying their ransom, we are buying their chains. By tomorrow morning, I will be their sole legal creditor. Greenlight the acquisitions, Nia. We are becoming the bank. I disconnected the conference call with Nia and took a deep breath, shifting my mindset from corporate predator to submissive daughter. It was time to play my part perfectly. I picked up my phone and dialed Catherine's private cell number. I let it ring 3 times carefully, controlling my breathing to ensure my voice would sound sufficiently strained and defeated when she finally answered. Well, Catherine said, answering on the 4th ring. Her tone was dripping with smug satisfaction. I assume you have seen the news this morning, Rachel. Ashley tells me the financial blogs are having a field day with your husband. I saw it, I said, injecting a slight deliberate tremor into my voice. The stock is taking a hit, Catherine. Jamal Board of Directors is panicking. The institutional investors are threatening to pull their support if this family drama becomes a full-blown public relations crisis. I warned you this would happen, Catherine replied, the triumph in her voice unmistakable. You chose to side with an outsider instead of your own blood. The market does not reward disloyalty, but as I said earlier, your father and I are willing to fix this. Have you initiated the wire transfer to Trent and Richard yet? I let out a heavy, defeated sigh. A simple wire transfer behind closed doors will not stop the rumors now, Catherine. The media is already framing Jamal as a predator who isolated me. If we just quietly pay off Trent mortgages, the tabloids will say it is hush money. We need a massive public display of unity to calm the shareholders. A public display. Catherine repeated, her interest instantly piqued. She loved nothing more than an audience. What exactly are you proposing, Rachel? The annual Connecticut Country Club Gala is this Saturday, I said, playing right into her deepest narcissistic desires. Jamal and I will fly out and attend the event with you and Dad. We will stand on stage with the family. And instead of the $5 million you asked for, I will publicly announce a $10 million capital injection into Richard Hedge Fund and Trent Brokerage. We will frame it as a strategic family partnership. It will clear Jamal's name, boost the stock back up, and give Richard the ultimate bragging rights in front of all his wealthy friends. The line went dead silent for a moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in Catherine's head. $10 million, a massive public spectacle at her prestigious country club. The ultimate validation of her superiority in front of the entire Connecticut elite. Her greed and desperate need for social validation completely blinded her to the obvious trap. 10 million. Catherine breathed, her voice fluttering with greedy excitement. Well, That is certainly a more appropriate number for a family of our standing, and a public announcement at the gala would completely restore your father's reputation among his peers. It is the respectful thing to do, Rachel. I am glad you have finally come to your senses and realized where your true loyalties lie. So we have a deal, I asked, keeping my voice meek and compliant. You will call off Ashley and her cheap public relations firm. No more hit pieces. Consider it done, Catherine declared haughtily. I will handle your sister. Make sure you wear something conservative and appropriate for Saturday, Rachel. We have very important investors attending, and I will not have you embarrassing us. We will see you at the gala. She hung up the phone without another word. I lowered the device from my ear, the fake tremor completely vanishing from my posture. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. She took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a loud notification. It was a message in the extended family group chat, a chat I had been silently sitting in for 5 years without participating once. Catherine had sent a massive block of text to dozens of aunts, uncles, and cousins. Wonderful news, family! Catherine typed, her digital gloating almost palpable. After a much-needed reality check, I have successfully tamed my rebellious daughter. Rachel and her husband are flying in for the country club gala this weekend to publicly apologize and announce a $10 million investment into Richard and Trent businesses. Blood is thicker than water. It just takes a strong mother to guide them back to the right path. Ashley replied immediately with a string of clapping emojis. Great job, Mom. Guess the tech money could not save her from needing her real family after all. I stared at the messages, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical detachment. They were celebrating a victory that did not exist. They were popping champagne on the deck of a sinking ship. While Catherine spent the rest of the afternoon driving to luxury boutiques in Manhattan to pick out an extravagant designer gown for her moment of triumph, I went to work executing her actual destruction. I sat down at my desk, opening my encrypted commercial banking portal. In commercial real estate, anonymity is the ultimate weapon. When you want to acquire prime property without driving up the price, you use blind limited liability companies. Shell corporations that entirely mask the true identity of the buyer. I had 3 such entities already established, fully funded, and legally detached from my primary business name. I initiated the transfers. Millions of dollars of my own liquid commercial capital flowed silently out of my primary accounts and cascaded into the 3 blind entities. I was arming my financial warheads. I called my elite team of commercial acquisition brokers. They were absolute sharks and bespoke suit specialists who negotiated distressed debt buyouts for massive corporate conglomerates. I have a target package for you, I told my lead broker, sending over the exact list of private lenders Nia had flagged. These lenders are currently holding the overdue mortgages on a Connecticut mansion and a luxury vehicle lease. They are also holding a massive amount of unsecured debt for a failing retail brokerage firm. I want you to approach these lenders using my blind entities, offer to buy the debt notes entirely in cash. These are highly toxic assets, Rachel, my broker warned over the line. The default risk is astronomical. I know, I replied smoothly. That is exactly why the lenders will be desperate to offload them. Offer them 30 cents on the dollar for an immediate cash settlement. Do whatever it takes to secure the paper. I want those debt notes completely transferred to my holding companies by Friday afternoon. Understood, he said, the thrill of the hunt evident in his voice. Consider it done. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the beautiful Seattle skyline. Catherine thought she had won. She thought she was going to stand on a stage this Saturday and parade me around like a conquered prize. She had no idea that while she was busy bragging to her country club friends and picking out expensive jewelry, I was covertly purchasing the very ground she stood on. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all that was left was the execution. That night, the penthouse felt less like a home and more like a war room. Jamal, Nia, and I spread out across the massive dining table. Empty espresso cups and glowing laptops formed a barricade against the storm raging outside. We were mapping out the financial web my family had woven, and the deeper we dug, the more rotten the foundation proved to be. Nia was a machine. She cross-referenced Trent ledgers with public filings, real estate records, and offshore shell company data. She was tracing every dollar that flowed between Trent Retail Brokerage and Richard Hedge Fund. The picture that emerged was not just of incompetence. It was a picture of desperate systemic fraud. "Richard is not just failing," Nia said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the room. She pointed to a complex flowchart she had built on her screen. "He is running a mini Ponzi scheme." I leaned closer, studying the numbers. "Explain it to me." "Look here," Nia traced a line connecting two dummy accounts. "Richard Hedge Fund has not made a profitable trade in over 2 years. His institutional investors started getting nervous and demanding their capital back. To avoid a massive run on the fund, Richard needed liquidity fast. He could not sell his core assets without realizing a massive loss and exposing his incompetence. So he turned to Trent." Jamal rubbed his temples, absorbing the data. Trent was sweeping retail client funds, mom and pop retirement accounts to cover his own margin calls. But he also needed to show liquidity for his compliance audits. "Exactly," Nia confirmed. "So they created a loop. When Richard needed cash to pay out a suspicious investor, Trent would wire stolen retail funds to a shell company. Richard would then transfer that money into his fund, claiming it as new investment capital. He would use that stolen money to pay off the old investors. Then when Trent compliance audit approached, Richard would wire the money back, inflating Trent accounts, just long enough to pass the regulatory snapshot." I stared at the screen, a cold realization settling over me. They are just passing stolen money back and forth. They are keeping each other afloat with cash that belongs to middle-class families. And it is all driven by Richard's desperate need to maintain his status. I added the pieces of the puzzle, locking together. My father's entire identity is tied to his wealth. Losing his country club status is a fate worse than death to him. He cannot handle the idea of walking into that clubhouse and being seen as a failure. He would rather commit federal felonies than admit he made a bad trade. "He is terrified of being poor," Jamal noted quietly. "He built his entire life around the illusion of superiority. Without the money, he is nothing." "That is why Catherine is so desperate for the 5 million," I said. "It is not just about rehabilitating my image. The loop is collapsing. The institutional investors are demanding more payouts, and Trent does not have enough stolen retail funds left to cover the gap. They need a massive, legitimate cash injection to plug the hole before the entire structure implodes. If the music stops, they both go to federal prison." Nia leaned back in her chair, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. "And that is why Trent signed the due diligence agreement so quickly. He was terrified of a random compliance audit because he knows his accounts are completely hollow. He thought signing the agreement would get him the 5 million before the regulators noticed." "He handed us the murder weapon," Jamal said. I looked at the flowchart, my mind shifting from analysis to execution. "We have the proof of their crimes. We have the motive. Now we need the leverage. We cannot just report them to the Securities and Exchange Commission right now. If the federal government freezes their assets, the courts take over. The remaining assets will be liquidated to pay back the defrauded investors. My parents will go to jail, but they will still be fighting us in court, trying to drag Jamal's name through the mud to save themselves. We need to own them completely before the feds arrive." Nia nodded slowly. "You want to execute the hostile takeover of their personal debt." I brought up a new screen on my laptop, accessing a specialized commercial database. "I want to buy the ground they stand on. Trent and Richard owe millions to private lenders. Those lenders are holding the mortgages on Catherine Mansion and Trent luxury cars. If those lenders catch wind of an SEC investigation, those debt notes become completely worthless, toxic assets. I want to buy those notes before the news breaks." I typed rapidly, querying the database for the specific properties and assets tied to my family names. The results populated within seconds. "Here it is," I announced. "Catherine and Richard Mansion in Connecticut is heavily mortgaged. They took out a second and third mortgage against it to maintain their lifestyle when the hedge fund started failing. The primary note is held by a private lending group in New York, and Trent." Jamal asked. "Trent is leasing that Porsche," I confirmed. "The lease is held by a high-risk auto financing company, and his suburban house is mortgaged to the hilt with a subprime lender. He is defaulting on both." I highlighted the names of the 3 private lending institutions. These lenders are desperate to offload this non-performing debt. They know Richard and Trent are high risk. If I approach them through anonymous shell companies and offer an immediate cash settlement, they will sell me the debt notes for pennies on the dollar. Nia looked at me, a mixture of awe and respect in her eyes. You are not just buying their debt. You are buying their freedom. You will be their sole legal creditor. You will have the power to foreclose on their homes and repossess their cars the moment the SEC raid happens. I smiled, a cold, calculated expression that mirrored the storm outside. They wanted to play a game of leverage. They wanted to use my husband's success to save their criminal enterprise. Now I am changing the rules. I am not going to negotiate with them. I am going to own them. I pulled up my encrypted commercial banking portal and began the process of setting up the blind limited liability companies. The trap was ready. The bait was set. Now it was time to close the jaws. The morning sun crested over the Seattle skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across my office. While the rest of the city woke up to their morning coffee, I was actively constructing the financial guillotine that would sever my family remaining lifelines. In the high-stakes world of commercial real estate development, anonymity is your most lethal weapon. When you intend to acquire prime property or distressed debt without driving up the market price or alerting your targets, you utilize blind limited liability companies. These are shell corporations meticulously designed to obscure the true identity of the buyer. I already possessed 3 such entities, sitting dormant, fully capitalized, and entirely disconnected from my primary business portfolio. I initiated the wire transfers. Millions of dollars in liquid commercial capital flowed silently out of my primary accounts, cascading through secure routing channels into the 3 blind entities. I was arming my financial warheads. Once the funds settled and the accounts showed maximum liquidity, I initiated a secure encrypted conference call with my elite team of commercial acquisition brokers. These were not standard real estate agents. They were absolute apex predators in bespoke suits, individuals who thrived in the cutthroat environment of distressed corporate debt buyouts. They negotiated with the ruthless agility of sharks, tearing apart complex financial structures to extract maximum leverage. I bypassed the junior associates and dialed my lead broker directly. His name was Preston, a man who possessed a terrifyingly sharp mind for exploiting financial weakness. "Good morning," Rachel, Preston answered. His voice was crisp, exuding the calm confidence of a man accustomed to handling massive high-risk transactions before breakfast. "What is the target package today?" "I have a highly sensitive acquisition directive for you, Preston," I said, maintaining a strictly clinical tone. "I am transmitting a secure file containing a list of 3 specific private lending institutions. These lenders are currently holding a significant volume of highly toxic, non-performing debt. Specifically, I am targeting the overdue mortgages on a luxury Connecticut mansion and a suburban property, as well as a high-risk lease on a luxury sports car. Furthermore, I want you to acquire any unsecured commercial debt tied to a specific retail brokerage firm operating in our area." I hit the send key, transmitting the encrypted file detailing Richard and Trent massive financial liabilities. There was a brief silence on the line as Preston reviewed the incoming data. His sharp eyes were undoubtedly scanning the astronomical default risks attached to those specific notes. "These are incredibly toxic assets, Rachel," he warned, his professional caution instantly kicking in. "The default risk on these promissory notes is practically radioactive. The debtors are clearly severely over-leveraged and struggling with catastrophic liquidity issues. You are essentially asking me to buy financial garbage." "I am fully aware of the risk profile," I replied smoothly, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the polished mahogany desk. "That is exactly why these specific private lenders will be absolutely desperate to offload them. They know these notes are on the verge of total default. If those lending institutions catch even a slight whisper of any impending regulatory action by the federal government, those assets become completely worthless overnight. They will be written off as total losses. You will approach them through my anonymous shell companies. Offer them an immediate unconditional cash settlement, 30 cents on the dollar. 30 cents? Preston repeated, a distinct hint of surprise coloring his professional tone. That is a violently aggressive lowball offer even for distressed suburban debt. They might balk at taking a 70% loss on the principal. They will not balk, I assured him with absolute certainty. They are holding paper on a sinking ship. A guaranteed 30% cash return today is vastly superior to a total loss tomorrow when these specific debtors inevitably declare bankruptcy. Do whatever it takes to secure the paper, threaten to walk away, play hardball. I want those debt notes completely transferred to my holding companies by Friday afternoon. No delays, no exceptions. Understood, Preston said, the thrill of the hunt now clearly evident in his voice. He recognized the maneuver for exactly what it was: a hostile financial takeover executed with absolute unyielding precision. Consider it done. My team will begin aggressive negotiations with their risk management departments immediately. I disconnected the call and leaned back in my leather chair. The machinery was officially in motion. Preston and his team would descend upon the private lenders, leveraging the undeniable promise of immediate cash against the looming, terrifying threat of total default. The lenders, eager to minimize their institutional losses, would surrender the debt notes without ever realizing they were handing me the keys to my family total destruction. Later that afternoon, Jamal walked into my office carrying 2 cups of fresh espresso. He handed me one, his expression thoughtful and incredibly focused. I just got off a tense call with the board of directors, he said, taking a seat directly opposite my desk. The stock price stabilized slightly after the initial morning dip, but the institutional investors are still highly anxious about that tabloid article. They are demanding a clear, aggressive strategy to address the rumors and protect the initial public offering valuation. We stick to the exact plan we formulated, I reiterated, taking a slow sip of the strong black coffee. The country club gala is this Saturday. That is when we dismantle their false narrative completely and publicly. If we try to fight the rumors right now, we only draw more unwanted attention to them. We need a definitive, incredibly public resolution that leaves absolutely no room for debate. Jamal nodded, his trust in my strategic vision completely unwavering. Have you heard from Preston regarding the debt acquisition package? Not yet, I said, checking my secure terminal for updates, but he is moving quickly. By tomorrow, I should have full, uncontested legal control over Richard and Trent's massive liabilities. As if on cue, my phone vibrated intensely with an incoming secure notification. It was a direct message from Preston. The first private lender had officially accepted the lowball cash offer on the Connecticut mansion mortgage. The legal transfer of the massive debt note was currently being finalized by their compliance officers. I turned the screen to show the message to Jamal, a cold, predatory smile touching my lips. 1 down, 2 to go. This is incredibly ruthless, Jamal murmured, shaking his head slightly in profound respect. You are literally buying the ground they stand on. When Catherine stands up at that fancy gala to announce her supposed victory over us, she will have absolutely no idea she is standing in a house she no longer owns. That is the sheer beauty of financial leverage, I said softly. They tried to use your incredible success to extort me. They thought they could manipulate the media to force my hand and save their failing empire. But they forgot that I operate in a commercial world where financial power is absolute and anonymity is a lethal weapon. I turned back to my computer monitors, refreshing the commercial database. The primary lien holder was no longer the New York Lending Group. It was now permanently listed under the name of my first blind holding company. The sensation was absolutely intoxicating. I was systematically stripping away their false security, their stolen status, and their entire fraudulent foundation. They had built a luxurious life on lies, theft, and the shameless exploitation of innocent retail investors. I spent the remainder of the afternoon monitoring the steady progress of the acquisitions. By late evening, Preston confirmed that the second lender had formally agreed to sell Trent's suburban mortgage and the unsecured brokerage debt. The final piece, the luxury auto lease on the sports car, was aggressively secured early the next morning. The digital signatures cleared the banking portals. The massive financial transactions were completely finalized. I was now the sole legal creditor for my parents' estate and my brother-in-law assets. I literally owned them. I sat in the glow of my monitors, letting the absolute reality of the moment wash over me. I literally owned them. Every brick of my parents' Connecticut mansion, every square foot of Trent's suburban house, and every piece of metal on his leased luxury sports car now legally belonged to my holding companies. I had bought their entire world for pennies on the dollar. They thought they were the architects of my destruction, but I had just purchased the deed to their financial graveyard. With the debt fully secured and the digital ink dried on the transfer documents, it was time to prepare the execution. I did not want a screaming match in a hallway. I wanted a public, undeniable, visually devastating revelation. I opened a new presentation file on my computer and went to work. I had managed commercial real estate portfolios worth billions, which meant I knew exactly how to present complex financial data to high-level investors. But this presentation needed a specific tailored aesthetic. I pulled up the promotional website for Catherine's upcoming charity event, the annual Connecticut Country Club Legacy Gala. I downloaded their specific branding kit, extracting the exact hex codes for their signature midnight blue and gold color scheme. I imported their elegant serif fonts and their pretentious crest logo. I meticulously designed my slides to seamlessly match the official gala program. When my presentation was loaded onto the country club projector, it would look exactly like a planned segment honoring our family philanthropic contributions. Right up until the moment I flipped to the second slide, I structured the data with lethal clarity. The first slide was a simple, elegant title card thanking the investors. The second slide displayed the shocking reality of Richard's failing hedge fund, charting the massive hemorrhage of institutional capital over the past 6 quarters. The third slide detailed Trent retail brokerage margin calls, highlighting the exact dates he lacked the liquidity to cover his catastrophic trading losses. The fourth slide was the kill shot. It featured high-resolution screenshots of the internal wire transfers, showing stolen retail client funds moving into Richard's shell companies and back again. The final slide simply listed the total outstanding debt amounts and listed my blind limited liability companies as the sole legal creditors, holding the notes on their personal properties. I sat back and reviewed the slides, making sure the font sizes were large enough to be read by the wealthy socialites sitting in the back row of the country club ballroom. A warm hand rested gently on my shoulder. Jamal leaned over my chair, his eyes scanning the glowing presentation on my screen. He read through the financial flowcharts, taking in the sheer, unadulterated devastation I had meticulously formatted in midnight blue and gold. "You are an absolute apex predator, Rachel," Jamal murmured, his voice a low rumble of profound respect and awe. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. "I have negotiated with some of the most aggressive venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, but watching you work is entirely different. Your tactical ruthlessness is a work of art. They wanted to use my company to save their sinking ship, and you just built a torpedo out of their own accounting errors." I reached up and placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "They tried to erase you, Jamal. They tried to use your race to invalidate your brilliance, and then they tried to use your success to cover their crimes. I am going to make sure that every single person in their elite, insulated circle knows exactly what kind of frauds they truly are." Across the room, the large video conferencing screen on my wall flared to life. Nia appeared on the display, broadcasting directly from her Manhattan law office. She looked impeccably sharp, her desk covered in organized stacks of digital printouts and legal briefs. "The due diligence package is officially complete," Nia announced, her tone pure business. "I have spent the last 12 hours cross-referencing Trent internal ledgers with Richard public filings. It is all here. I have isolated the exact routing numbers, the timestamps, and the specific client accounts that Trent raided to cover his margin calls. I also pulled the IP addresses from the wire transfers. Richard approved the illegal capital injections from his personal terminal at the hedge fund." Nia held up a thick bound dossier to the camera. It was hundreds of pages of undeniable, irrefutable proof of federal financial crimes. "This is not just a breach of fiduciary duty," Nia continued, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the legal kill. "This is wire fraud, securities fraud, and massive embezzlement. They commingled retail investor retirement funds with proprietary trading capital. The sheer arrogance it takes to leave a digital paper trail this obvious is staggering. Trent practically signed his own federal indictment when he authorized that due diligence release to my firm. "Are we ready to initiate the final phase?" Jamal asked, walking over to stand beside my desk facing the video screen. "The financial trap is set on our end," I confirmed, looking at Nia. "The debt is secured under my holding companies. If the federal government moves in, they cannot touch the personal assets I just acquired. I am legally insulated, and I am the primary creditor for their homes and vehicles. The public presentation is formatted and ready for the gala on Saturday." Nia smiled, a razor-thin expression of corporate justice. "Then it is time to invite the final guest to our little party." She turned her attention to her second monitor. We watched through the camera feed as she navigated her web browser. She bypassed the standard public complaint forms and logged directly into the Securities and Exchange Commission official whistleblower portal. As a senior corporate attorney, her submissions carried immediate heavyweight credibility with federal regulators. "I have uploaded the encrypted ledgers, the wire transfer receipts, and Trent's signed waiver." Nia narrated her actions aloud, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I am flagging this as an ongoing active embezzlement scheme, posing an immediate threat to retail investors. That specific classification triggers an emergency review protocol." We watched her mouse cursor hover over the final submission button at the bottom of the federal portal screen. "Once this goes through, there is no stopping the machine," Nia warned, looking directly into the camera lens. "The federal government will freeze Richard and Trent corporate accounts. They will petition a federal judge for immediate arrest warrants. The field office will likely coordinate a raid to secure physical evidence." "Send it," I said, my voice resolute, holding no hesitation and absolutely no mercy. Nia clicked submit, sending the entire dossier of Trent and Richard financial crimes directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower portal. The screen flashed green. A secure confirmation number appeared in bold black text across Nia display. The federal machinery was officially in motion. We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the digital receipt that represented the imminent destruction of decades of country club arrogance. There was no undo button. The algorithms at the Securities and Exchange Commission would automatically flag the massive discrepancies Nia had meticulously outlined. By Monday morning, a team of federal agents would be tearing Richard Hedge Fund and Trent Brokerage apart down to the absolute studs. But tomorrow was Saturday. Tomorrow was the gala. And tomorrow night I was going to beat the federal government to the punch and execute my family in the court of public opinion. I closed my laptop and let out a long breath. The financial warheads were locked. The legal traps were sprung. Now it was purely a matter of theater. Friday evening arrived with a deceptive calm. Jamal and I were sitting in the penthouse living room, finalizing the logistics for our arrival at the Connecticut Country Club the following night. My phone, resting on the glass coffee table, suddenly buzzed with a rapid succession of loud notifications. It was the extended family group chat. This was the same digital forum where Catherine had gloated about taming her rebellious daughter just a few days prior. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. Catherine had decided to address me directly in front of dozens of aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. It was a classic narcissistic power play designed to publicly establish her absolute dominance and remind me of my subordinate place in her hierarchy before the main event. Rachel Catherine typed, her digital tone dripping with condescension. "Since you and your husband are joining us tomorrow to announce your financial contribution, I need to make a few things perfectly clear regarding the dress code. We have highly prominent elite investors attending this gala. These are Richard top-tier clients. I expect you to wear something conservative and appropriate. We cannot have you embarrassing us or making the investors uncomfortable with flashy new money trends. Please ensure you look like you actually belong in this family." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of the demand, a second message popped up. It was from Ashley. "And please make sure Jamal wears a proper tailored tuxedo," Ashley chimed in, tossing her own racist microaggression into the public forum for the whole family to see. "The waitstaff at the country club wear black suits. We do not want anyone getting confused and asking him to fetch them a cocktail." Jamal leaned over my shoulder, reading the brightly lit screen. A low, dangerous chuckle vibrated in his chest. He did not get angry. He just shook his head at their terminal stupidity. They really cannot help themselves, he noted quietly. They are standing on a trapdoor with a noose around their necks, and they are criticizing the tailor who made the rope. I stared at the messages. 5 years ago, reading those words would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and shame. I would have frantically searched my closet for the most muted, invisible outfit possible, desperately trying to blend into the background to avoid their wrath. I would have begged Jamal to conform to their impossible, bigoted standards. But I was not that broken 22-year-old girl anymore. I was a commercial real estate titan, and I literally owned the mortgage on the country club where they were currently dining. I did not argue. I did not defend my husband. I did not point out that Jamal's custom-tailored Italian tuxedo cost more than Trent's entire leased car. I knew that arguing with a narcissist in a public forum only feeds their ego and gives them the conflict they crave. Instead, I gave them exactly what they wanted, draped in a layer of lethal irony that they were far too arrogant to comprehend. I tapped the screen and crafted my response. I kept it to a single, devastatingly precise sentence. I will wear exactly what a major stakeholder should wear. I hit send and tossed the phone back onto the coffee table. Within seconds, Catherine replied with a heart emoji. She completely missed the threat. She interpreted the word stakeholder as my absolute submission, assuming I was referring to my impending $5 million donation to her husband's failing fund. She thought she had won. She believed she had successfully put me in my place and secured her financial bailout. Her blinding greed and desperate need for social validation made her completely immune to reality. Let them sleep well tonight, I told Jamal, standing up and walking toward our master bedroom, because it is the last peaceful night of sleep they will ever have. Saturday evening arrived, bringing with it a crisp, biting autumn chill. The penthouse was quiet as Jamal and I prepared for the gala. There was no nervous energy, no frantic rushing. We moved with the deliberate, measured calm of executioners heading to the block. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my dressing room. I was not wearing anything conservative. I was not wearing anything appropriate for a submissive reform daughter. I stepped into a custom-designed floor-length designer gown. It was not black, and it was not muted navy. It was a brilliant, commanding shade of blood red. It featured sharp architectural shoulders, a plunging neckline, and a silhouette that screamed absolute untouchable power. It was the dress of a woman who owned the room before she even walked through the doors. It was a garment designed to draw every single eye, to dominate the space, and to make Catherine Pastel Society dresses look like cheap rags. Jamal stepped up behind me in the mirror reflection. He looked devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, radiating the kind of effortless billionaire wealth that Trent could only dream of faking. He reached out and gently pulled the zipper up the back of my gown, securing the clasp at the top. His hands lingered on my waist, his dark eyes meeting mine in the glass reflection. The transformation was complete. The frightened daughter was dead and buried. The financial predator had fully taken her place. Jamal smiled, a sharp, brilliant expression that matched the lethal energy in the room. Ready to burn their empire down? Jamal asked, his voice low and rich with anticipation. I smoothed the blood-red fabric over my hips and met his gaze in the mirror. I did not hesitate. To the ground. We took a private helicopter from Seattle to New York, then a chauffeured black car straight to the Connecticut border. The drive up the winding oak-lined driveway of the Heritage Country Club felt like traveling back in time to a century I had actively chosen to leave behind. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to open our doors. The crisp autumn air bit at my bare shoulders, but the adrenaline pulsing through my veins kept me perfectly warm. Jamal offered his arm and I took it, stepping out of the vehicle with the undeniable posture of a conqueror. Nia flanked us on my right, carrying her sleek leather clutch that held the digital triggers to my family's complete destruction. The grand ballroom was a sickening display of decaying old money. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of pastel designer dresses and stiff black tuxedos. A string quartet played softly in the corner, barely audible over the hum of self-important networking. The moment the heavy mahogany doors swung open to admit us, the ambient chatter in the room noticeably dropped. My blood-red gown was a violent slash of color against the sea of muted beige and champagne. Heads turned, eyes widened. The whispers began immediately. Before we could even take 10 steps into the venue, Catherine materialized from the crowd. She was wearing a pale gold dress that cost a small fortune. Her face plastered with a frantic, rigid smile that did not reach her panicked eyes. She zeroed in on me, completely ignoring Jamal and Nia, as if they were entirely invisible. She lunged forward, grabbing my elbow with a vice-like grip, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Rachel, darling," Catherine gushed, her voice pitched unnaturally high for the benefit of the wealthy onlookers nearby. "You made it. You look so striking. A bit loud for a charity event, but we can work with it. Come with me right now. The board of directors and Richard top-tier investors are dying to welcome you back." She tried to pull me away simultaneously, throwing a dismissive, incredibly degrading glance over her shoulder at my husband and his sister. "Jamal," Catherine added, waving her hand in a shooing motion toward the dimly lit perimeter of the ballroom. "Be a dear and wait by the coat check or the bar area. The photographers are setting up for the legacy family portraits near the main stage, and we need to keep the visual framing strictly traditional. You understand. Do try not to block the waitstaff pathways, and please tell your companion to do the same." She was literally trying to position my billionaire husband, the man whose company valuation could buy this entire golf course twice over, in the back of the room, like he was the hired help. She dismissed a senior corporate attorney as a mere companion. The racism was so deeply ingrained, so utterly casual, that she did not even realize she was insulting the very people holding the executioner axe over her neck. Jamal did not blink. He smiled, a terrifyingly polite expression that offered absolutely no compliance. "I think I will stay right by my wife, Catherine," Jamal said smoothly, gently, but firmly, prying her clutching fingers off my bare arm. "We are a package deal tonight." Nia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing behind her designer frames. Furthermore, Nia added her tone, slicing through the air with corporate precision. "The investors you are so eager to impress will absolutely want the chief executive officer of a newly public tech giant in the front row. It boosts confidence, something Richard Fund desperately lacks." Catherine's face flushed with suppressed rage, but she could not cause a screaming match in front of the key investors she was frantically trying to con. She spun around and marched toward the front of the room, expecting us to follow her like obedient ducklings. As we navigated through the crowded tables of the ballroom, the whispers of the Connecticut elite grew loud enough for me to hear clearly. "Is that Rachel, a woman dripping in diamonds?" murmured to her dinner companion just inches from me. "I thought Catherine said she was still recovering at that exclusive Swiss mental health retreat." "I know," the second woman replied, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Catherine told everyone at the tennis club that Rachel had a severe psychological break 5 years ago. She said it was a tragic psychotic episode, and they had to institutionalize her for her own safety. I had no idea she was finally released." I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, my face a mask of cold, unyielding marble. A Swiss mental health retreat. A severe psychotic break. That was the elaborate, disgusting fiction my mother had spun for half a decade. Rather than admit to her racist country club friends that her daughter had willingly walked away to marry a brilliant black man, Catherine had told the entire state of Connecticut that I was clinically insane and locked away in a European asylum. She had systematically assassinated my character to preserve her bigoted suburban facade. The sheer magnitude of the lie solidified every single ounce of my resolve. I was not just going to bankrupt them tonight. I was going to humiliate them so profoundly that they would never be able to show their faces in this state again. We reached the front of the ballroom just as the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The ambient lighting dimmed, shifting focus to the grand stage at the head of the room. A massive projector screen hung behind a polished wooden podium, currently displaying the pretentious gold crest of Richard Failing Hedge Fund. Richard stepped up to the podium, adjusting his silk tie and flashing his signature empty salesman smile to the crowd of wealthy investors he had been actively defrauding for years. He tapped the microphone twice, the sharp thud echoing through the silent, expectant ballroom. He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with the desperate, greedy relief of a drowning man who believed he had just manipulated his way onto a luxury rescue boat. He took a deep breath, ready to introduce his prodigal, mentally fragile daughter and publicly claim his $10 million financial salvation. Richard leaned into the microphone, his mouth opening to deliver his carefully rehearsed lines of financial salvation. Before a single syllable could escape his lips, Catherine glided across the stage with the predatory grace of a seasoned socialite. She practically snatched the heavy metal microphone from his hands, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply against the stand. She positioned herself at the absolute center of the grand podium, blocking Richard entirely from the view of the wealthy crowd. This was her grand performance, her ultimate moment of social vindication, and she absolutely refused to share the opening act. She adjusted the microphone height, offering a sickeningly sweet, heavily practiced smile to the sea of wealthy investors and country club elites staring up at her in the dim golden light. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Catherine began, her voice echoing clearly through the opulent ballroom. It was a tone thickly coated in artificial warmth, designed specifically to charm the millions of dollars sitting at the expensive banquet tables. Tonight is a celebration of legacy of endurance and, above all, of family unity. As many of you know, our family has faced some unique challenges over the past few years. We have navigated the painful, quiet burdens of health struggles and required absences. She paused for dramatic effect, placing a manicured hand delicately over her heart, playing the role of the long-suffering, devoted matriarch to absolute perfection. She was actively selling the lie about my fake mental breakdown in a Swiss clinic right to my face, demanding sympathy from the very people she was desperately trying to defraud. "But tonight our family is finally whole again," Catherine continued, gesturing gracefully in my general direction, carefully keeping her hand angled so she would not accidentally point at Jamal or Nia. "My beautiful daughter Rachel has returned to us. She has overcome so much, and her presence here is a testament to the unwavering strength of our bloodline." Catherine gripped the polished edges of the podium, her eyes sweeping over the crowd of institutional investors. "Many of you are aware that Rachel has built a rather impressive commercial real estate portfolio during her time away. What you might not know is that her incredible financial acumen did not just appear out of nowhere." I felt my jaw tighten, my teeth grinding together. Catherine was deliberately setting the stage to rob me of my hard-earned success in front of hundreds of people. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice swelling with unearned pride. "Rachel's success is the direct result of the brilliant financial foundation her father provided her. Richard taught her everything she knows about market leverage, capital investment, and corporate discipline. The wealth she has generated is simply a reflection of the impeccable pedigree and business instincts passed down through our family name. She owes her entire commercial empire to the education and resources her father generously bestowed upon her. It is the ultimate proof that the financial strategies utilized by my husband's hedge fund are virtually unmatched in the industry. She completely erased my husband. She completely erased the 80-hour work weeks, the cheap noodles, the agonizing hustle of building a tech startup from a cramped apartment. She reduced Jamal's $100 million initial public offering to absolutely nothing, attributing all my commercial wealth to the corrupt, failing hedge fund manager standing right behind her. I glanced sideways at Jamal, fully expecting him to be bristling with suppressed anger at the blatant disrespect. Instead, my billionaire husband stood perfectly relaxed. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne in his right hand, taking a slow, casual sip. A genuine, highly amused smile played at the corners of his mouth. He looked like a man watching a highly entertaining, painfully predictable tragicomedy unfold. He was completely unfazed by Catherine's pathetic attempt to erase him because he knew she was currently standing in a building that belonged entirely to me. On my other side, Nia remained equally stoic, though her energy was far more lethal. She did not bother looking at Catherine's fake display of maternal affection. Instead, Nia subtly raised her left wrist, pulling back the crisp cuff of her tailored charcoal suit to check the glowing face of her smartwatch. She tapped the digital screen, once her sharp eyes tracking the shifting numbers. She was silently counting down the exact minutes and seconds. The federal warrants had been signed. The tactical raid units had been dispatched from the field office. Naya was simply verifying the estimated time of arrival for the federal agents who were currently speeding down the Connecticut highway to drag my parents away in handcuffs. Nia lowered her wrist and caught my eye, giving me a single, imperceptible nod. The timing was perfectly aligned. Catherine wrapped up her nauseating monologue, raising her hands to invite applause from the gullible crowd. And so it is with immense maternal pride that I announce the merging of our family successes, Catherine declared, her voice reaching a dramatic theatrical crescendo. Tonight, Rachel returns the fruits of her father's teachings back into the family fold, ensuring that our legacy will continue to dominate the financial sector for decades to come. She stepped back from the podium, beaming brightly, as polite, wealthy applause rippled through the grand ballroom. She turned and handed the microphone back to Richard, her eyes flashing with a triumphant, greedy gleam. She truly believed she had just cemented her social supremacy and secured her massive financial bailout in one flawless, manipulative speech. Richard stepped forward eagerly, gripping the sides of the podium tightly to hide the desperate tremor shaking his hands. His face was flushed red with the intoxicating thrill of his impending salvation. "Thank you, Catherine, my beautiful wife," Richard said, puffing out his chest to project false confidence to his anxious institutional investors. "My fund has always prioritized aggressive, calculated growth. Tonight, my daughter is going to demonstrate her absolute faith in my market strategies by providing a massive, highly strategic capital injection into our primary portfolios. This investment will spearhead our next phase of aggressive corporate expansion and solidify our market dominance." The ballroom grew incredibly hushed, the wealthy attendees leaning forward in their plush velvet chairs, eager to witness the massive transfer of wealth. Richard locked eyes with me, his gaze practically burning with frantic, unadulterated greed. He raised his hands and began to clap slowly, loudly, a commanding gesture designed to summon me to the front of the room. "Come on up here, Rachel," Richard announced, his voice echoing powerfully through the massive sound system. "Come up to the stage and present the ceremonial investment check. Show everyone what true family loyalty looks like." I did not carry a velvet folder. I did not hold an oversized novelty check. My hands were completely empty, save for a small matte black presentation remote concealed seamlessly in the palm of my right hand. The applause from the ballroom floor was polite and expectant, a gentle wave of wealthy approval washing over the space as I took my first step toward the grand stage. The heavy fabric of my blood-red gown swept across the floor, demanding attention, projecting an aura of absolute lethal dominance. Jamal released my arm with a final reassuring squeeze, stepping back to stand shoulder to shoulder with Naya. They formed an impenetrable wall of support at the base of the stage, two highly calculating predators standing guard, while I moved in for the final strike. I ascended the carpeted stairs with slow, deliberate precision. Every eye in the Connecticut Country Club was fixed entirely on me. I could feel the collective weight of their judgment, their curiosity, and their deeply ingrained societal expectations. They expected a broken, reformed daughter returning to the fold, begging for her parents' grace with a massive financial offering. They expected a grateful heir buying her way back into high society. I reached the center of the stage. Richard was vibrating with barely contained euphoria. Sweat glistened on his forehead under the harsh stage lights. His hands were trembling as he reached out to pull me into a performative, entirely fabricated fatherly embrace. I did not let him touch me. I stepped smoothly to the side, my posture rigid and unyielding, effectively forcing him to drop his arms awkwardly back to his sides. The rejection was subtle, but visible to the front row. Richard's nervous smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he scrambled to recover his composure. He stepped back, gesturing grandly toward the microphone mounted on the heavy wooden podium. I stepped behind the podium. The wood was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the harsh glare of the spotlights. I looked out over the sea of wealthy socialites and institutional investors. Hundreds of faces stared back at me, waiting for the performance my mother had promised them. I saw Ashley sitting in the front row wearing a smug, triumphant smirk, her husband Trent beside her looking sickly pale, but desperate for the financial bailout he believed was coming. I saw Catherine standing near the edge of the stage, her chest puffed out with absolute narcissistic pride, waiting to bathe in the glory of my submission. I gripped the edges of the podium. The room grew deathly quiet. The ambient chatter ceased entirely. The clinking of expensive crystal glasses against fine china plates faded away. The silence stretched heavy and thick with anticipation. I did not rush. I let them wait. I commanded the silence, forcing every single billionaire, every hedge fund manager, and every suburban socialite to hang on my impending words. I reached forward and detached the microphone from its stand, holding it firmly in my hand. I stepped around the podium, removing the physical barrier between myself and the audience. I wanted them to see me completely. I wanted there to be absolutely no doubt about who was in control of this room. "Good evening, everyone!" I began, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully through the massive sound system. It was smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of the trembling gratitude my parents had anticipated. "It is truly fascinating to stand before you tonight. I have spent the last 5 years building a life completely independent of this zip code. Yet my mother has managed to keep my name alive in your circles with some incredibly creative storytelling." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the tables. I saw several prominent wives exchange uncomfortable glances. "I understand there have been whispers about my absence." I continued, my tone sharp and conversational. "My mother, in her desperate bid to protect her carefully curated social standing, told many of you that I suffered a severe psychological breakdown. She claimed I was locked away in an exclusive Swiss mental health retreat for half a decade. I must admit, the sheer creativity of that lie is almost impressive. It takes a profound level of dedication to fabricate a clinical psychiatric history for your own daughter, just to avoid admitting that you disowned her because you could not stomach the race of the brilliant man she chose to marry." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The sudden, brutal honesty sliced through the polite country club atmosphere like a machete. In the front row, Ashley dropped her jaw. Catherine took a stumbling step forward, her face draining of all color, her meticulously maintained facade cracking under the violent impact of the truth. Richard gripped the edge of the stage curtain, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. "But we are not here to discuss my mother's racist delusions or her penchant for pathological lying," I said, raising my voice slightly to cut through the rising murmur of the shocked crowd. "I am here to discuss business. I am here to discuss the concept of legacy capital and generational stewardship that my family loves to talk about so much." I turned slightly to look at my father. Richard was sweating profusely now. The triumphant gleam in his eyes had been entirely replaced by raw, suffocating terror. He realized in that exact moment that I had not come to save him. I had come to bury him. I turned back to the audience, my posture radiating absolute financial dominance. I looked directly into the camera lenses of the event photographers stationed at the back of the room. I wanted every single frame of this execution captured perfectly. "Thank you, Richard, for that incredibly generous introduction," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. I let the words hang in the air for a fraction of a second, ensuring maximum impact. "But I am not here to invest in a failing hedge fund. I am not here to inject capital into a sinking ship." The silence in the room became absolute. The wealthy investors staring up at me suddenly looked very alert, their financial instincts recognizing a massive corporate collapse happening right in front of their eyes. "I am here to announce a change in ownership," I declared, my words hitting the room like a seismic shockwave. I raised my right hand, revealing the matte black presentation remote I had kept concealed. I pointed it directly at the massive projector system suspended from the ceiling. Without breaking eye contact with the crowd of panicked elites, I clicked the central button. The massive projector screen behind Richard switched from the charity logo to a stark, undeniable financial audit. The massive high-definition projector screen flickered brightly, washing the entire stage in a harsh, clinical white light. Gone was the opulent gold crest of my father's supposedly prestigious hedge fund. In its place stood a highly detailed, impeccably structured forensic accounting ledger. I had designed the spreadsheet to be perfectly legible from the very back row of the sprawling ballroom. At the top of the screen, the header read, "Unauthorized capital transfers and retail embezzlement." I clicked the remote again, and a series of thick neon red boxes highlighted the exact routing numbers and transaction dates. The wealthy crowd stared in absolute bewilderment as the numbers registered in their minds. These were not minor accounting errors or simple administrative oversights. These were multi-million-dollar transfers sweeping directly out of retail client retirement accounts and funneling straight into proprietary trading desks. I did not give the audience time to whisper amongst themselves. I spoke clearly into the microphone, my voice echoing over the rising tide of confusion. What you are looking at on this screen is the internal ledger of Trent Boutique Brokerage Firm over the past 24 months, I announced, making sure my enunciation was flawless. When Trent began failing his margin calls due to gross incompetence, he did not declare bankruptcy. He panicked. He actively began commingling funds. He stole directly from the retirement portfolios of middle-class families to cover his own catastrophic trading losses. The murmurs in the ballroom instantly escalated into sharp, alarmed gasps. Wealthy socialites covered their mouths in genuine horror. Institutional investors sitting at the very front VIP tables suddenly sat up straight, their faces hardening into masks of fury as their sharp financial instincts recognized the anatomy of a massive federal crime. They were looking at the very money they had entrusted to this family vanishing into thin air. I clicked the remote for the third time. A new flowchart materialized on the massive screen. This one featured the unmistakable corporate routing numbers of Richard Flagship Hedge Fund. But Trent was not acting alone. I continued pacing slowly across the stage, commanding the entire venue. A retail broker cannot hide a multi-million-dollar liquidity crisis without a larger financial entity acting as an illegal clearinghouse. Every single time Trent faced a routine compliance audit, Richard authorized a temporary illegal capital injection from his hedge fund to inflate Trent accounts. Once the regulatory snapshot was taken, Trent wired the stolen money back. They created a closed loop of systemic fraud. They were running a miniature Ponzi scheme right under your noses, using your institutional capital to prop up their failing suburban facade. I turned to look directly at my father. Richard had turned completely ghost white. All the blood had rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pallid gray. The arrogant, untouchable hedge fund manager had vanished, entirely replaced by a terrified, cornered criminal who realized he was about to spend the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary. His eyes darted wildly around the room, witnessing his elite investors pulling out their cell phones, furiously dialing their corporate legal teams and compliance officers. He was watching his entire identity, his carefully hoarded wealth, his social status, and his freedom disintegrate in real time. Desperation clawed at him. He let out a strangled, panicked sound and lunged forward across the stage, reaching aggressively for the microphone in my hand. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to cut the audio and scream to the wealthy crowd that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He never even made it past the first step. Before Richard could close the distance between us, Jamal moved. My husband did not run or shout. He simply glided forward with the terrifying, effortless speed of a highly trained predator. Jamal stepped smoothly in front of the stage stairs, placing his tall, broad-shouldered frame directly between my father and me. He did not raise his fists. He did not need to. He simply planted his feet firmly on the carpeted floor, crossed his arms over his chest, and locked his dark, piercing eyes entirely on Richard. His stance was completely silent, yet it radiated an imposing lethal authority that sucked the air right out of my father's lungs. Richard stopped dead in his tracks, freezing like a frightened animal caught in headlights. He looked up at the brilliant, powerful black man he had once mocked and insulted, realizing with crushing clarity that Jamal was an immovable object he could never hope to bypass. The ballroom was rapidly devolving into utter chaos. Investors were shouting across the tables, demanding immediate answers about their capital investments. Waitstaff stood frozen against the walls, unsure of how to proceed with the evening service. Then a shrill, hysterical scream pierced through the escalating noise. It was Ashley. My younger sister leaped up from her front row seat, her face twisted in a mask of pure denial and absolute rage. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the stage. "Lies!" Ashley shrieked, her voice cracking with profound desperation. "That is a lie. She is making this all up. Those documents are completely fabricated. She is just a bitter, jealous outcast trying to ruin our family because we cut her off. Trent would never do something like that. Tell them, Trent. Tell them she forged those spreadsheets." Trent remained glued to his chair, completely paralyzed by fear, staring blankly at the neon red numbers on the screen that detailed his exact federal crimes. He knew there was absolutely no way to deny the raw data. But Ashley continued to scream, demanding that the club management turn off the projector and throw me out of the building immediately. She was fighting a losing battle against undeniable reality, desperately clinging to her leased Porsche and her country club membership. I looked down at her hysterical, thrashing form with absolute, unyielding coldness. I raised the presentation remote and clicked the central button one final time. The screen behind me shifted instantly. The financial ledgers disappeared, replaced by a massive high-resolution scan of a legal document. It was the non-disclosure and financial review agreement that Naya had drafted just days prior. The text of the irrevocable waiver of liability and full audit consent clause was magnified for everyone to read clearly. At the very bottom of the stark white document, highlighted by a bright yellow digital marker, was a signature. It was not a digital stamp. It was a frantic, messy, unmistakable handwritten signature, applied with a heavy gold pen. I leaned into the microphone, my voice slicing effortlessly through Ashley, hysterical screaming. "I did not fabricate a single digit on those ledgers, Ashley," I declared, ensuring every investor in the room heard the absolute finality in my tone. "Because your husband voluntarily handed them over to my corporate legal team." He was so terrified of a random federal compliance audit that he signed a binding due diligence release, legally waiving his right to privacy and handing us full unredacted access to his fraudulent accounts. That is his signature on the screen, Ashley. He authenticated his own embezzlement. The silence following my declaration shattered into a million pieces. Ashley collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, as the undeniable reality of her husband's federal crimes washed over her. But it was Catherine who truly lost whatever fragile grip she still held on her sanity. My mother shrieked a high-pitched guttural sound that completely violated every rule of country club etiquette she had spent her life worshipping. She abandoned all pretense of elegance, frantically waving her diamond-clad arms at the catering staff and the venue managers standing paralyzed near the kitchen's swinging doors. "Cut the microphone!" Catherine screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Turn off that screen right now. She is a sick, disturbed girl. She is having another psychotic episode. Someone call security and have her dragged out of here. She is destroying her family in front of our friends." She spun around to face the wealthy investors sitting at the VIP tables, forcing a horrific, trembling smile through her panic. "Please, you have to understand my daughter is unwell. This is a targeted delusion. Richard has made everyone in this room incredibly wealthy. You know us. We are your friends." Not a single person at those tables moved to comfort her. In the world of high finance, loyalty only extends as far as your last successful profit margin. The moment the word embezzlement flashed on that screen, accompanied by ironclad proof, Catherine and Richard became highly contagious financial lepers. Investors physically shifted their chairs backward, recoiling from my parents as if they were suddenly covered in a lethal pathogen. I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I felt absolutely zero empathy. There was no lingering childhood trauma, no desperate desire for her approval, and no pity for her public destruction. She had built a fortress of bigotry and greed, and I was simply handing her the bill for the construction costs. "You do not have a family." "Catherine," I announced clearly, my amplified voice easily overpowering her frantic, unamplified sobbing. "You have a portfolio, and your portfolio is entirely bankrupt." Catherine froze the word bankrupt, hitting her with the physical force of a freight train. Her eyes darted up to me wide, with a terrifying new level of comprehension. "While you were busy bragging in your group chats about successfully taming your rebellious daughter, I was busy executing a hostile takeover of your entire existence." I continued pacing slowly across the stage, maintaining absolute eye contact with her. "You thought my silence over the past few days meant I was submitting to your extortion. In reality, I was finalizing wire transfers to my commercial holding companies." I pointed the presentation remote at the screen and clicked the button one more time. The slide shifted from Trent's signed admission of guilt to a stark, simple list of corporate acquisitions. The names of the 3 private lending institutions that had been propping up my family lavish lifestyle appeared in bold white text, followed by a bright green stamp that read "Acquired and Transferred." "My holding companies approached your desperate, panicked private lenders yesterday morning," I declared, ensuring every syllable rang with lethal finality. "They knew Richard and Trent were operating on borrowed time. They were absolutely thrilled to offload your highly toxic, non-performing debt for a fraction of its original value. I bought your debt in cash, Catherine. I bought all of it." Richard let out a hollow, suffocating gasp, his hands flying to his chest as he realized the inescapable magnitude of my financial checkmate. He knew exactly what this meant. He was not just facing federal prison. He was facing total, absolute destitution. I stepped right to the edge of the stage, looking directly down into Catherine's horrified, tear-streaked face. "I own this prestigious country club membership you value above your own flesh and blood," I said, delivering each sentence like a physical blow. "I own the overdue mortgages on your sprawling Connecticut mansion. I own the deed to Trent's suburban house. I even own the high-risk financing lease on the luxury sports car Trent drove here tonight. You do not own a single brick, a single blade of grass, or a single drop of gasoline to your name." Catherine stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the carpet. She caught herself against a banquet table, her breath coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. The elite socialites she had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at her with naked disgust and morbid fascination. She was ruined. Her carefully curated suburban facade had been entirely incinerated, leaving nothing but the ashes of a common fraudster. "You are completely destitute," I stated, my voice echoing through the silent, captivated ballroom. "You tried to use my husband's brilliant success to bail out your criminal enterprise. You thought you could demand $5 million from us and walk away clean. But you miscalculated the cost of your arrogance. By Monday morning, my commercial eviction attorneys will begin processing the paperwork. You will be physically removed from your homes. You have absolutely nothing left to hide behind." The sheer gravity of the moment settled heavily over the grand ballroom. No one spoke. No one dared to move. The utter annihilation of Richard and Catherine was so complete, so legally and financially flawless, that it left the entire Connecticut elite in a state of profound shock. I had not just defeated my family. I had systematically erased their power, their status, and their wealth, absorbing it all into my own empire. I lowered the microphone from my face, ready to hand the stage over to the final guests of the evening. As the heavy, breathless silence of absolute ruin settled permanently over the stunned country club crowd, a new sound pierced through the crisp autumn night outside. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, cutting sharply through the quiet suburban darkness. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, layering into a chorus of urgent, aggressive alarms, echoing rapidly up the long, oak-lined driveway of the country club. The red and blue emergency lights began to flash intensely through the sheer curtains of the grand ballroom windows. The wail of federal sirens grew deafeningly loud, signaling the undeniable, terrifying arrival of the authorities. The piercing shriek of the sirens cut through the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the country club ballroom. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the flashing red and blue emergency lights painted the manicured lawns in frantic strobe-like bursts. Panic, raw and unfiltered, began to ripple through the crowd of elite investors. Yet nobody moved toward the exits. They were entirely captivated by the catastrophic implosion happening on the main stage. I stood perfectly still, watching the realization physically crush the men who had tried to extort my husband. Richard's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany podium to keep from collapsing, his chest heaving as he stared blindly at the revolving emergency lights outside. He was a dead man walking. But Trent reacted differently. Trent stood in the front row, his slick, arrogant finance broker persona melting away to reveal the terrified, cornered animal underneath. His eyes darted from the massive projector screen displaying his undeniable federal crimes down to his trembling hands, and finally, up to me. The math clicked in his head. The due diligence release he had hastily signed in my office. The unredacted ledgers he had voluntarily transmitted. The federal authorities swarming the building. I had not just refused to bail him out. I had personally engineered his fast-track ticket to a federal penitentiary. The sheer magnitude of his own stupidity broke whatever fragile psychological dam he had left. A guttural primal roar of absolute rage erupted from his throat. It was the sound of a man watching his least luxury life disintegrate into a concrete prison cell. "You ruined me!" Trent screamed, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. He shoved Ashley aside with such violent force that she tumbled into the adjacent banquet table, sending crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor in a shower of shattered glass. Trent charged the stage. He did not care about the hundreds of wealthy witnesses. He did not care about the incoming police. His mind was consumed by a blind, destructive urge to physically attack the woman who had orchestrated his absolute downfall. He scrambled up the carpeted steps, his hands curled into fists, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I did not need to. Before Trent Boots could even hit the top tier of the stage, Jamal moved. My husband did not react with frantic panic or uncontrolled anger. He moved with the terrifying, calculated precision of a man who was entirely in control of his physical environment. Jamal stepped smoothly across the stage, intercepting the charging broker with effortless grace. Trent swung wildly, a desperate, uncoordinated punch aimed directly at my head. Jamal did not even break a sweat. He slipped beneath the clumsy arc of Trent's arm, his large hands clamping down on the broker wrist and elbow with vice-like strength. In one fluid, seamless motion, Jamal twisted Trent's arm sharply behind his back, applying exact, excruciating pressure to the joint. Trent let out a sharp yelp of pain as his forward momentum was violently redirected. Jamal drove him downward, slamming Trent face first into the polished hardwood floor of the stage. The impact echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. Jamal dropped his knee squarely between Trent's shoulder blades, pinning the heavier man to the ground with absolutely inescapable force. Trent thrashed and cursed his expensive suit jacket, tearing at the seam, but he could not move a single inch. Jamal held him down effortlessly, his breathing perfectly, even his custom-tailored tuxedo not even slightly wrinkled. "Stay exactly where you are, Trent." Jamal commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that demanded absolute compliance. "You have done enough damage to your own life tonight. Do not add aggravated assault to your federal indictment." At that exact moment, the grand double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The elegant, refined atmosphere of the Connecticut Country Club was instantly obliterated by the overwhelming presence of federal authority. Over a dozen men and women in tactical gear and dark windbreakers marched aggressively into the venue. The bold, bright yellow letters identifying them as federal agents and local police were emblazoned across their backs and chests. Their heavy tactical boots stomped against the plush floral carpets, shattering the illusion of untouchable suburban wealth. The elite socialites, the hedge fund managers, and the arrogant millionaires who had spent their entire lives believing they were completely above the law, scattered like frightened insects, desperately clearing a wide path for the advancing agents. The lead investigator, a tall, imposing man with a severe, no-nonsense expression, marched straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked on the stage where Richard stood trembling, and Trent lay pinned to the floor. Nia stepped forward, moving with the absolute untouchable confidence of a senior corporate partner who was currently running the entire show. She did not wait to be questioned. She took control of the federal raid the exact same way she took control of a corporate boardroom. She walked smoothly down the stage steps to meet the advancing federal agents, her posture radiating lethal legal authority. She reached into her tailored charcoal blazer, retrieved her sleek leather wallet, and smoothly flashed her New York Bar Association credentials directly at the lead investigator. "Agent Smith, I presume?" Nia asked, her tone crisp, professional, and dripping with absolute victory. The lead agent paused, signaling his team to hold their positions as he inspected her credentials. "I am Agent Smith," he confirmed, his sharp gaze assessing the chaotic scene on the stage. "And you are the corporate attorney who initiated the emergency filing." "I am," Nia replied, offering him a perfectly professional, razor-thin smile. "The encrypted embezzlement dossiers, the unredacted digital ledgers, and the signed due diligence waivers you received through the whistleblower portal this morning were compiled and transmitted by my office. Every single financial discrepancy has been thoroughly documented and cross-referenced for your immediate convenience." The lead agent nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by the flawless silver platter presentation of federal evidence. Nia turned gracefully and gestured toward the stage with a manicured hand. "As for the subjects of your warrants," Nia continued, her voice projecting clearly to ensure every single person in the ballroom heard her next words. "The perpetrators are right here. You will find Richard standing by the podium, and Trent is currently occupying the floor." The federal agents swarmed the stage immediately. Two heavily armed officers hauled Trent up from the hardwood floor, wrenching his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic clink of steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists echoed sharply through the grand ballroom. Trent was weeping now, openly sobbing as the officers read him his Miranda rights. His arrogant, racist bravado was entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a pathetic, broken criminal. A second team of agents surrounded Richard. My father did not fight. He did not scream. He simply held his hands out, his eyes wide and vacant, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic, irreversible destruction of his life. The metal cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, severing his connection to high society forever. Catherine collapsed to her knees near the edge of the stage, burying her face in her hands and wailing hysterically as she watched her husband and her son-in-law being dragged away like common thieves. The wealthy investors in the crowd did not look away. Instead, they raised their smartphones, the bright flashes of their cameras illuminating the ballroom as they eagerly documented the spectacular, humiliating downfall of the family they had once respected. Richard and Trent were marched aggressively down the center aisle, paraded in federal chains right in front of the very elite society they had sacrificed everything to impress. The execution was flawless, absolute, and utterly complete. We left the country club through a discreet side exit while the federal agents were still busy cataloging evidence and taking statements from the stunned elite. The crisp Connecticut air felt entirely different as we stepped outside. It felt completely clean. We boarded our private jet back to Seattle shortly after midnight. There was no grand celebration on the flight, no popping of champagne corks. The adrenaline simply faded away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a quiet, unshakable sense of absolute victory. Jamal held my hand across the aisle, our fingers tightly intertwined as the jet carried us far away from the smoking wreckage of my past. I fell asleep somewhere over the Midwest, and for the first time in 5 long years, I did not dream about my mother harsh words or my father cold dismissals. The next morning, I woke up to the gentle hum of our Seattle penthouse and the rich smell of freshly ground coffee. The autumn storm had completely passed, leaving the skies over the Puget Sound a brilliant, piercing blue. Jamal was already awake, sitting at the massive marble kitchen island. He was wearing a simple gray sweatshirt, looking incredibly relaxed. He pushed a steaming mug toward me as I sat down, then pointed the remote control at the flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. "You are going to want to see this," Jamal said, his voice laced with deep satisfaction. The media landscape had completely detonated overnight. Every major financial news network had rapidly abandoned the sloppy, fabricated smear campaign Ashley had planted just days prior. The narrative had violently flipped. The morning news anchors were practically breathless as they reported on the massive coordinated federal raid that had dismantled Richard Failing hedge fund and Trent boutique retail brokerage. The screen displayed side-by-side mugshots of my father and brother-in-law. Both men looked pale, exhausted, and utterly defeated under the harsh fluorescent lights of federal processing. We were no longer the villains of the story. We were the corporate heroes. The financial pundits praised the brilliant surgical precision of the anonymous whistleblowers who had exposed the massive white-collar fraud ring before it could drain any more retail retirement accounts. Jamal's reputation was not just restored, it was absolutely bulletproof. The media framed him as a visionary chief executive officer who, alongside his formidable commercial real estate developer wife, refused to be extorted and instead actively dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Jamal's phone had been vibrating non-stop since sunrise. His corporate public relations team sent over a detailed morning brief. The institutional investors who had been panicking 48 hours ago were now calling to double down on their financial positions. Market confidence was through the roof. The pre-market trading indicators for Monday morning showed that health tech stock price was preparing to skyrocket. The smear campaign was completely obliterated, replaced by a massive wave of public and financial support. We had navigated the crisis flawlessly, turning a desperate extortion attempt into the ultimate display of corporate strength. But the financial networks were only half the story. The tabloids were having an absolute field day with the sheer unfiltered drama of the country club arrests. Jamal switched the television channel to a major celebrity gossip network. High-definition video footage shot from a news helicopter filled the massive screen. The helicopter was circling directly over Catherine's sprawling Connecticut mansion. The pristine, heavily guarded fortress of elite suburban wealth was completely surrounded. Dozens of news vans with massive satellite dishes were parked haphazardly along the manicured street. Reporters were camped outside the iron gates, broadcasting live to the entire country. But the most devastating footage was not coming from my parents' house. It was coming from Ashley's suburban driveway. A leading gossip outlet had secured exclusive smartphone video of my younger sister's complete breakdown. The dramatic footage was currently going viral across every single social media platform. Ashley was standing on her expansive cobblestone driveway, wearing only a silk floral bathrobe. Her blonde hair was a messy, unbrushed bird nest, and thick black mascara was running in dark streaks down her panicked face. She was screaming hysterically, waving her arms in pure, unadulterated panic. Right behind her, a heavy-duty commercial tow truck was actively winching her leased luxury Porsche onto its steel flatbed. The flashing amber lights of the tow truck reflected off the wet pavement. This was not a federal seizure by the authorities. This was a private commercial repossession. My blind holding company, acting as the sole legal creditor for the high-risk auto lease, had immediately triggered the strict default clause the very moment Trent was placed in federal custody. The repo men had shown up at dawn, completely ignoring Ashley's frantic demands and entitled threats. She lunged at the tow truck driver, her voice screeching in the amateur video. "You cannot take this car. Do you know who my husband is? He is a prominent broker. You are going to be sued into oblivion. Leave my property right now." The burly tow truck driver did not even flinch. He simply handed her a thick yellow carbon copy of the default notice, hopped into the cab of his heavy truck, and drove away, taking her final shred of fake social status with him. Ashley dropped to her knees on the cold driveway, clutching the yellow paper, weeping openly as the neighborhood cameras captured every single second of her absolute humiliation. I watched the video loop twice, feeling nothing but a cool clinical detachment. She had actively tried to destroy my husband's life just to keep that car. Now she was sitting on the pavement in a bathrobe, broadcasting her ruin to millions of strangers. "It is completely over," I said softly, taking a sip of the hot coffee. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last lingering ghosts of my childhood. "We did it. We actually burned it all down." Jamal walked around the kitchen island and pulled me into a deep, grounding embrace. He rested his chin on the top of my head. "You protected our family, Rachel. You built an incredible empire and you used it to shield us. I have never been more proud of you." The penthouse was a peaceful sanctuary. We had survived the brutal storm and the future stretched out before us, completely unburdened by the toxic expectations of the people who had abandoned me. I closed my eyes, ready to simply exist in the quiet peace we had violently fought for. Then a sharp, piercing electronic chime shattered the Sunday morning silence. It was the secure intercom system connected directly to the ground floor lobby desk. I frowned, pulling away from Jamal. We were not expecting any deliveries, and our building security was incredibly strict, specifically instructed to turn away any unannounced media or corporate visitors. I walked over to the wall-mounted security panel and pressed the blinking green button. "Yes, Marcus," I said, addressing the head of building security. "Is there a problem down there?" "Good morning, Mrs. Rachel," Marcus replied, his professional tone edged with a distinct note of discomfort and urgency. "I am terribly sorry to interrupt your quiet morning. We have an unauthorized individual at the main lobby gates. Send them away." Marcus Jamal called out from the kitchen area. "We are not doing any press interviews today. Tell the reporters to contact the corporate communications office tomorrow." "It is not a reporter, sir," Marcus clarified, the intercom crackling slightly. "It is a woman. She managed to bypass the outer perimeter before my guards intercepted her at the heavy glass doors. She is completely frantic. She is begging to see you, Rachel. She is causing a massive scene, and she absolutely refuses to leave the premises, even after I threatened to call the Seattle police and have her arrested for trespassing." I stared at the intercom panel, a cold prickle of unease sliding slowly down my spine. "Who is it, Marcus?" Marcus paused for a heavy second before answering. "She says her name is Catherine. She says she is your mother." "Send her up, Marcus," I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I released the intercom button and turned back to Jamal. He had set his coffee mug down on the granite counter, his posture instantly shifting from relaxed Sunday morning to highly alert protector. He did not question my decision, but his dark eyes carefully scanned my face, searching for any sign of hesitation or lingering trauma. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Rachel, Jamal asked softly. "You do not owe her an audience. We can have security escort her off the premises and slap a restraining order on her by tomorrow morning." "I need to finish this," I told him, taking a slow sip of my espresso. "If I let security drag her away, she will spend the rest of her life convincing herself she is a tragic victim of an ungrateful daughter. I need to close the door myself." Jamal nodded, stepping back to give me the physical space I needed, but remaining close enough to intervene if she tried anything unpredictable. The silence in the penthouse stretched, punctuated only by the low hum of the private elevator ascending the side of the skyscraper. Every floor it climbed felt like a ticking clock counting down to the final inevitable confrontation. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft melodic chime. Catherine stepped out into my Italian marble foyer. The visual transformation was absolutely staggering. Just a few days prior, she had stood in this exact same spot, wearing an immaculate designer trench coat, her hair sprayed into a gravity-defying helmet, evaluating my home with the arrogant sneer of a feudal lord inspecting peasant lands. Today, the country club queen was entirely dead. Catherine looked completely disheveled, her carefully constructed high society facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She was wearing the same pale gold dress she had worn to the gala last night, but the expensive fabric was severely wrinkled and stained. She had clearly not slept. Her blonde hair hung flat and stringy around her face, devoid of its usual pristine volume. Thick black mascara tracks cut deep, messy lines down her pale foundation-streaked cheeks. She looked small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. She took one unsteady step onto the polished marble floor. She looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot and swollen, taking in my calm posture and the steaming espresso cup in my hand. Then her knees simply gave out. Catherine collapsed onto the cold stone floor of my foyer. She did not attempt to maintain her dignity. She threw herself forward, her hands slapping against the marble as she began to sob hysterically. It was a loud, ugly scraping sound that echoed sharply against the high ceilings of the penthouse. "Rachel, please!" Catherine wailed, her voice cracking and desperately hoarse. "You have to stop this. You have to call off your lawyers. They served me with commercial eviction papers at 6 o'clock this morning. They said a blind holding company owns the estate and I have 30 days to vacate the premises entirely. You bought the debt, you own my house." I did not say a word. I simply stood there looking down at the woman who had spent my entire childhood making me feel fundamentally inadequate. "They took your father away in handcuffs." Catherine continued sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. "They froze all our personal checking accounts. My credit cards are declining. I cannot even pay for a hotel room. My friends will not answer my calls. Everyone at the club has blocked my number. I have absolutely nothing left, Rachel. You cannot take my home. I am your mother. Please, I am begging you. Have mercy." She reached out her trembling fingers, grasping desperately at the hem of my trousers. I took a deliberate step backward, smoothly pulling the fabric out of her frantic grip. I did not want her touching me. I did not want her desperate toxic energy anywhere near me. I looked down at her sobbing form, feeling absolutely zero empathy. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, letting the rich, dark flavor wash over my palate while she wept on my floor. "Mercy!" I asked, the single word dropping from my lips like a block of solid ice. Catherine looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting with desperate, pathetic hope at the sound of my voice. "Yes, Rachel. Please. We are family. You disowned me because of my husband's skin color." I stated clearly, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable truth. "You refused to attend my wedding. You told your country club friends I was locked away in a Swiss mental asylum because you were too cowardly and too deeply racist to admit the reality of my life. For 5 years, I did not exist to you. I was a ghost, a disgraceful secret you swept under the rug." Catherine shook her head frantically, trying to formulate a defense. "It was your father," she babbled, pointing a trembling finger toward the elevator as if Richard were standing right behind her. "Richard forced me to cut contact. He was furious about the optics. I always wanted to reach out, Rachel. You have to believe me. I do not believe a single syllable that comes out of your mouth," I replied smoothly. "You did not come to my home 5 days ago to apologize. You came to extort me. You threatened to run to the tabloids and smear Jamal's initial public offering. You explicitly told me that $5 million was the minimum price tag to buy my way back into your good graces." "I am sorry," Catherine cried, burying her face in her hands. "I was desperate. The hedge fund was collapsing. I did not know what else to do." "You are not sorry for what you did, Catherine," I corrected her, my tone clinical and utterly devoid of pity. "You are only sorry that you lost. You are sorry that you handed me the legal authority to audit Trent books. You are sorry that you bragged in a family group chat instead of hiring a competent defense attorney. You did not come here this morning looking for forgiveness. You came here for real estate." She let out a loud, pathetic wail, her forehead resting against the cold marble floor. "Please, Rachel. Where am I supposed to go? I cannot be homeless. I cannot live on the street. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Just let me keep the house." I stared at her ruined form. She was offering me total submission, but she had nothing left of value to give. She was an empty vessel, completely drained of the toxic power she had wielded over me for my entire life. The cycle of abuse was officially permanently broken. I turned away from her and walked slowly over to the sleek wooden console table, resting against the foyer wall right next to the vase of pristine white orchids. I reached out and picked up a crisp manila envelope that I had prepared early this morning. I turned back around, walked over to my sobbing mother, and held the envelope out, handing it down to her. Catherine stared at the crisp manila envelope resting in her trembling hands. For a brief, pathetic second, a flicker of delusional hope danced across her tear-streaked face. Her narcissistic mind, completely incapable of processing absolute defeat, desperately tried to convince her that I was handing her a lifeline. She thought it was a new deed, a modified lease agreement, or perhaps a modest monthly allowance to keep her afloat. Her manicured fingers, shaking violently, fumbled with the metal clasp. She tore the envelope open and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents inside. Her eyes darted across the bold black text printed on the heavy corporate letterhead. The flicker of hope died instantly, replaced by a hollow, gaping horror. It was not a bailout. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day notice of commercial eviction. The document meticulously detailed the total liquidation of her estate, outlining the exact date and time the county sheriff would arrive to physically remove her and her belongings from the Connecticut mansion. I had even included a highlighted clause stating that any property left behind after the deadline would be seized and sold at a public auction to recoup the legal fees she had forced me to spend. Catherine dropped the papers. They scattered across the polished Italian marble floor of my foyer like dead leaves. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. She had played her final card, weaponized her last drop of maternal guilt, and it had bounced off me without leaving a single scratch. "You have 30 days to pack whatever cheap clothes the federal government allows you to keep," I told her, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "Leave my home before I have building security throw you out." I did not wait for her to scramble to her feet. I stepped back, grasped the heavy brass handle of the oak door, and swung it shut. The heavy latch clicked into place, echoing through the quiet penthouse. The physical and emotional barrier was permanently sealed. I locked the deadbolt, effectively locking my mother out of my life forever. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, listening as Catherine let out one final muffled wail before the private elevator doors opened and swallowed her up, returning her to the absolute ruin she had created. The ensuing weeks played out exactly as Nia had predicted, unfolding like a perfectly orchestrated corporate demolition. The federal prosecutors did not show a single ounce of leniency toward my father or my brother-in-law. The sheer volume of undeniable digital evidence we had handed them made a trial completely unnecessary. Richard and Trent were formally indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and massive embezzlement. Faced with decades behind bars, their arrogant defiance crumbled. They both took plea deals, turning against each other in a desperate, pathetic attempt to shave a few years off their sentences. It did not work. The judge made an example of them, handing down sentences that ensured both men would spend the next several years in a maximum security federal penitentiary wearing standard-issue jumpsuits instead of custom-tailored Italian wool. Without the stolen retail funds to prop them up, their entire empire evaporated overnight. The Securities and Exchange Commission seized their corporate accounts to begin the long process of compensating the defrauded investors. But the personal assets, the mansions, the luxury cars, the country club memberships belonged entirely to my blind holding companies. I liquidated everything. I sold the sprawling Connecticut estate to a newly wealthy tech developer who immediately tore down the colonial structure to build a modern architectural masterpiece. The physical monument to my family bigotry was literally reduced to rubble and erased from the map. Catherine and Ashley were left with absolutely nothing. Stripped of their stolen wealth and completely excommunicated from their elite social circles, they were forced to face the harsh reality of the working-class lifestyle they had spent their entire lives mocking. The society friends who used to attend their lavish garden parties pretended they did not exist. Their phone calls went straight to voicemail. The country club formally revoked their legacy memberships, barring them from even walking onto the golf course. With no income and no assets, they were forced to move into a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment on the desolate outskirts of the city. Ashley had to take a job as a shift manager at a mid-tier retail clothing store, forced to fold the exact same generic sweaters she used to openly ridicule. Catherine, entirely incapable of holding down a real job, spent her days sitting in their tiny living room staring blankly at a cheap television trapped in a prison of her own making. They had no power, no prestige, and no audience left to manipulate. Back in Seattle, the world felt incredibly light. The air was crisp and clear, completely untainted by the toxic expectations of my past. It was a beautiful Friday evening. The sun was beginning to set over the Puget Sound, casting vibrant streaks of gold-purple and deep crimson across the endless skyline. The towering glass buildings of the city sparkled in the fading light. Jamal and I stood on the expansive glass balcony of our penthouse, the cool ocean breeze washing over us. The initial public offering had been a massive historical success. Health tech was currently dominating the market, its valuations soaring higher every single week. But the money was secondary to the profound sense of peace that filled our home. The heavy glass sliding door opened behind us. Nia stepped out onto the balcony, a brilliant, relaxed smile lighting up her face. She held 3 crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. She handed one to Jamal and one to me before raising her own glass toward the vibrant Seattle sunset. To the absolute destruction of toxic liabilities, Nia toasted, her voice ringing with triumphant joy. And to the unstoppable rise of a true empire. We clinked our glasses together, the clear crystal ringing like a bell in the evening air. I took a sip of the champagne, the crisp bubbles dancing on my tongue. I looked at Nia, the brilliant, ruthless sister who had weaponized the law to protect me. Then I looked at Jamal, the incredible, loving husband who had built a kingdom with his own hands and stood like a fortress against my worst nightmares. The toxic bloodline was permanently severed. Our wealth was entirely secured. The enemies who had tried to erase us were legally and completely stripped of everything they valued. I leaned into Jamal, resting my head against his strong shoulder. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me close. "Family is not blood," I said softly, watching the last golden rays of the sun dip below the shimmering horizon. "It is the people who stand with you when the world tries to burn you down." This story teaches us a powerful lesson about boundaries and the true definition of family. We are often conditioned to believe we owe our relatives endless loyalty simply because we share blood. However, Rachel proves that toxic behavior, manipulation, and disrespect should never be tolerated, even from parents. True family consists of people who uplift and respect you, not those who only value your financial worth. You have the absolute right to walk away from abusive environments and build a peaceful sanctuary of your own. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know how you set boundaries.